start at 7 o'clock. Hello, everybody. We should get started. I'm Dave Goldenberg. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. This is a public information session for the Affordable Housing Committee to review the plan, which was made public, the draft of the plan, which was made public last week. Are we recording? Just want to make sure. Great. So, what I'm going to do tonight is review some of the key points in the plan, and I would invite you to ask questions as we go along, but if they're more generalized comments, please hold them for the end. Everybody will have an opportunity to comment. The rules are pretty basic. Just please be civil. Give your name and street when you talk. Stay on topic and keep remarks to 3 minutes. That's interesting, the little hazy background there. I don't know what that is. So, what this is all about is that under Connecticut Section 8-30J, which was passed in 2017 and amended in 21, it requires that not later than June 1st, 2022, at least once every 5 years thereafter, each municipality shall prepare or amend and adopt an affordable housing plan for the municipality and shall admit a copy to the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management. The municipality may hold public information meetings to organize or organize other activities to inform residents about the process of preparing the plan. And following adoption, the municipality shall regularly review and maintain such plan. I would urge you could go online and just find the complete text of this and read through, but those are the key components. For right now, this plan is due June 1st, 2022. We've been working on it for about a year. The process involved more than 30 interviews, a public input session in November, a community survey that was done digitally, data analysis and research, plan development, a draft plan, public meetings and revisions, goes to planning and zoning, Board of Selectmen approval. And then we send it to the state. Ridgefield, and this is really important to keep in mind, Ridgefield has always been changing. People say we don't want Ridgefield to change. It's always been changing. There's the historical population over on the left. In the beginning of Ridgefield as we know it, when the land was purchased, we had settlers move in and set up their homesteads, and we saw some growth there. There was a big burst when the railroad came in the late 1800s, and New Yorkers discovered Ridgefield and built the mansions that were called cottages. And also that resulted in an influx of mostly European laborers to build and maintain the properties, many of whom settled in here and are some of the prominent families we have in town today. In the 50s and 60s, families needed a comfortable, safe place to raise their baby boomers. And the population of Ridgefield in the 50s and 60s climbed well over 300%. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, with the financial bubble, we saw an influx of a lot of well-heeled people and we saw a lot of these they're derogatively referred to as McMansions, but large houses set up. So that was a big change. And then in the past 2 years with the pandemic, we've seen an influx of families with children displacing now a lot of empty nesters who have been waiting for the opportunity to sell. And we're seeing another change in population. And I imagine that our projections that the school population is going to stay low or decline will change, and then we'll see an increase in that area. So the point is, Ridgefield has always been changing, and it will always continue to change. So we have to ask ourselves not whether Ridgefield should change, but how it should change. And how do we go about creating affordable housing in that changing environment? Well, there are two ways we can do it. We can do it the state's way. The state has stated that it has an interest in promoting affordable housing, especially in the suburban towns. And there has been repeatedly legislation introduced. 8-30 is probably the most famous or notorious, depending on how you look at it. But just now there are a couple of things coming to the floor that could radically change the way we approach it. The state is determined. The alternative is to do it our way. You know, people are talking about reclaiming local control from the state. Well, the way to do that is not to fight them on things that they're going to do anyway and allowed to do, but it's to do it our way and show them that we're making the strides that we need to make. This plan is about reclaiming local control for the town of Ridgefield.
Can you repeat that?
We don't do it our way.
Can you just repeat that last sentence? I'm sorry.
It's about reclaiming local control for Ridgefield.
And by not fighting? That part that you said.
Well, we can still fight what's going on at the state. But if we make an effort in our town, it will affect things. It will show we're making progress. In fact, one of the bills up there requires towns to create their own plans like we're doing now and demonstrate actual progress.
Can you explain, you said changes that are on the floor, I guess, in Hartford. Can you explain some of that, or are you going to get into
Well,
that?
there was just a legislative session, or it's in session right now, but there are bills that have come out of committee. Whether they get to the floor or not, who knows. There are a number of housing bills, some have made it, some haven't. One that's made it is what's called the Fair Share Bill, which would apportion affordable housing to each region, to apportion to each municipality, and then each municipality would have an obligation to meet that number over a certain period of time. Another one that's been proposed would allow housing authorities to build affordable housing outside their own jurisdiction, that is, in other municipalities. I advise you to go online and look at some of the things. The state is determined. And if we play nothing but defense, then we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to be subject to what the state's doing. The state, in their guidelines, has asked each town to draft a vision. So we drafted a statement that we felt could pretty broadly reflect how Ridgefielders feel. Although more populous than many small cities, Ridgefield has the soul of a small town, with quintessential New England architecture, a mom-and-pop commercial hub, and a population that knows and cares deeply for one another. It's a town devoted to the well-being of its residents, investing heavily in schools, public health, and safety, and the arts. Above all, Ridgefield aspires to be a complete community and a compassionate one, welcoming and valuing all residents, regardless of background or economic status, and working to ensure diversity of housing opportunities for all. Questions?
Where is that vision for Ridgefield? Where is this taken from? Is this the AHC's vision for Ridgefield?
This was drawn up by the Affordable Housing Committee.
That statement right there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's not really a vision for Ridgefield, it's the Affordable Housing Committee's vision for Ridgefield.
Well, once it's approved by the town, it will be the vision for Ridgefield if it's passed in this form.
And all the members of the Affordable Housing Committee have signed off on this?
All the members of the Affordable Housing Committee have had participation in this and have had all their say.
Can you clarify that a bit further?
What are you looking for?
So they gave input to every word in there?
Yes.
Okay.
It was circulated multiple times for input.
And it's been agreed upon?
Well, it's been agreed upon by consensus. In other words, there was no vote, is this it? But we just kept on working changes until everybody's concerns
Sounds
were
pretty
accepted.
loose.
We're looking for public input to refine the plan and arrive at a final draft which will be the subject of a vote.
Mhm.
Anything else related to this? Yes.
Will the plan be a vote for the town or just for your committee?
The Board of Selectmen and the Planning and Zoning Commission have the final say.
So we as residents and taxpayers do not have a say.
Not as it's currently organized right now, no.
Would you argue that right now people have a chance to, like, probably you don't have editing rights, but by having public input, that is the opportunity for the community and residents to have a say, is that
There's
fair?
this meeting, there will be,
Well, this is an informational meeting, though.
there'll be another meeting, there will be a public hearing. So there'll be tonight and 2 further opportunities for public input.
And will that input, have any, like, would there be any change to the plan based on input that you get from us?
I think there will be some, yes.
Okay,
Not every request or suggestion will go in, but some for sure.
okay.
This is a draft of the plan, this is not the complete plan. It doesn't have the appendix, it doesn't have the introduction attached to it. This is the body of the plan right now. So the point is to review it. Yes?
Thank you, Dave. Andrea Beebe, Main Street. So you said it's a consensus of the Affordable Housing Committee, but you're saying it's not been voted on by the Affordable Housing Committee for this vision statement. Those are 2 different things. So I want you to explain that.
Yes. Committees can move forward on things in 2 ways. One of them is to hold a vote, which requires a motion, and one of them is by unanimous consent. And that is, unless there are no objections, we move forward. If there are no objections, we move forward. That was our process for most of it. At every instance, everybody had an opportunity to continue to provide their input, make their changes, have their objections heard. There were multiple requests for any motions that any people might have wanted to make. So at no time during this process was anybody kept in the dark or shut down.
So why last week did you say to Maureen Kozlar, everybody was in agreement on this plan, when not everybody had voted on this plan?
Because we didn't hold a vote on the plan.
Then
But
why
there
did
was
you tell
agreement.
her everybody was in agreement?
Because we sent it around and circulated multiple times and asked people for more and more input and more comments, and then everybody said it's okay, then it was good to go.
But I think there's some people on the committee that I've talked to that have said they did not see the plan and they were not okay with everything.
Well, everybody had a copy of the plan. It was sent to everybody. And anybody who suggests otherwise is not telling you the truth.
Are there other members from the AHC here?
Yes,
Can you point them out, if that's okay?
please introduce yourselves.
I'm Sharon Kent, I'm a member.
Kevin Brown?
Whit Hazel.
Krista Willett. Cheryl Hack.
Any other questions on this?
How was the committee formed and when?
The committee was established in 1997 by the Board of Selectmen. It's not a standing committee, so it's not in the charter, but it's reappointed every year by the Board of Selectmen.
So so people volunteer?
You
That's what
volunteer, you're interviewed, and if you're appointed, you have to be sworn in. It's like many other town committees. Yes?
I'm Paul Trevay, I'm on Fairfield Court. I've been keeping up with this and reading about it on Facebook and everything, but when something is as dramatic as this is being proposed, why wouldn't this go before the town for a vote? Why is it a select committee who can have their own thoughts on how it should be done, assuming that they are working to the interest of the town as they perceive it, make the decisions, and the rest of us who are in fact paying the taxes that run this town have really no say, except we can come here, we can express our position, you can take our position for what it's worth or not, and then proceed to do what you please. I'm a taxpayer and I pay a lot of taxes to live in this town. And to change the whole dynamic, what you read there, I can ask you, how is that not the case today? What are
Probably
you
is.
trying to accomplish?
Right.
No,
Well,
that is becoming.
This statement,
Yeah, this
we've gotten one
it is
page into,
today.
we've gotten one page into this presentation so far, but let me answer your first question, which is what authority do we have to do this? We're the Affordable Housing Committee. We were tasked with putting this together. It is not our job to approve it. That is the job of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, once we deliver the plan, it's up to them to determine how to move it through,
Or deny it,
Oh, wait,
or not move it through.
or not move it through,
Yeah.
correct?
so
Don't forget that's an option.
Christine Moore, Scott Ridgefield, I'm sorry, I
Yes.
haven't said my name. So that means, could they decide to bring it to a vote to the
They
town?
could, that's up to them.
So then, how would we make that known to them that, I mean, it would make sense.
They-
Honestly,
they
it's odd to
meet
me that,
regularly,
well, it's odd to me that you wouldn't, that something this big, just as that gentleman said in the back, wouldn't be brought to a vote. So I would hope that, you're not saying it won't be voted
I'm
on.
not saying it won't be, I'm saying it's not our responsibility to determine, the law does not require it to be brought to a vote.
Right, but in the best
Whether it-
interest of the town, we want local control, right? So we want to.
But this is not a question for the Affordable Housing Committee, this is a question for the Board of Selectmen, and that should be
Okay.
directed to them.
Absolutely, thank you.
Can I just make it, so Sean Connolly, Barrett Hill Road, I'm also on the Board of Selectmen, so
Okay.
part of the team that would determine
Oh,
that.
great.
I have seen things online that make bold statements about what this is.
Mhm.
So I just encourage people to maybe listen to what this is. I've heard people say, there's something, on there that say, oh, we don't want 2,500 units. That's not quite what the plan is, as I read it. Others may disagree, but there's a lot of passion here, but I just want to make sure people understand what quote unquote this is.
Sure.
So we can move forward on that basis.
Okay, let me just ask a question before I move forward. How many of you have read through the plan from beginning to end? That's good, that's most of you.
The actual plan now, not
The
the,
plan,
not
not
the
the,
little
not the summary,
user-friendly
right.
version.
the full draft plan. Good. Should I continue? So the perception of Ridgefield, you and I hear this all the time. Our median income is about $164,000. It's the safest town in Connecticut, number 6 in the USA. We have A+ schools. It has Connecticut's first cultural district. We have Main Street that is the envy of towns surrounding us. Ridgefield is paradise. It's a perfect place. It's and I kind of agree with that. The thing is, it's not that way for everybody. And that's very important to understand. The reality is that 42% of renters are cost burdened. And let me explain what the concept of cost burden is, because it weighs heavily into this. According to many, many studies, if you are spending more than 30% of your income on your total housing costs, and that includes principal and interest, rent, taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and so on, then you are cost burdened. Now, if you're making $500,000 a year and you're spending a little more than that, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who, because they are cost burdened, have to make economic decisions such as, should I repair my car or pay the rent? Should I skip my meals so the kids can eat so we can pay the rent? This is not apocryphal. This exists in Ridgefield. It's just not perceived to exist in quantity. 19% of renters are severely cost burdened. What that means is they're paying more than 50% of their income. 28% of owners are cost burdened, and 17% of owners are severely cost burdened. Poverty is at 2% in Ridgefield. And ALICE, maybe you've heard the term, it stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. That is the so-called working poor, people who are living paycheck to paycheck. That constitutes 20% of Ridgefield households. So 22% of Ridgefield households, in one manner or another, and to whatever degree, are struggling. So that contradicts a little bit with the perception on the left of the screen. Let's take a statistical selfie of the town. Population, this was in the 2020 census, which is going to be questioned for accuracy again and again, is 25,033. The median age is 45.6, up from the baby boom glory days of 1970 when it was 27. Now in 2020, remember there were still a lot of empty nesters in Ridgefield sitting on 3 and 4 bedroom houses. We know that there were over 400 houses transferred, so it'll be interesting to see what the average age is once the American Community Survey data comes up. But the age has gone up. As we've built more, we find that household size has actually shrunk a little bit as a result. Median income is pretty high. It's not a particularly diverse town. It's 88% white, 5% Hispanic and Latino, 4% Asian, and 1% black. And there's just well, it's better in the plan, but you can see that it's very different for the county and the state. So let's look a little bit at need. We talked about housing cost burden. And what this shows on the left is what I was talking about. How many people are housing cost burdened as owners, how many are cost burdened as renters, and the dark numbers on the left are the severely ones, and the lighter blue are just the regular 30% cost burdened. But then, you know, like I said, if someone's making $500,000 a year and wants to spend half their income on housing, they're not going to, they're technically cost burdened, but not really. So we looked at it and we said, let's take away everybody who's making more than $75,000 a year or more. And we still found that 19%, nearly 20% of Ridgefield households earning less than $75,000 spend 30% or more on housing. So 20% of the town is legitimately cost burdened. Some of them severely cost burdened. We don't see it, but it's here.
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question on that? I should have asked this the other day. I had a thought when I was first reading through that. Do we know, to the extent some of that might be retired people who maybe my income, maybe have great assets, but my actual income is severely reduced? Do we, I don't know if we could have information on that, but is that something we can get to?
We can. I believe that's figured out.
Okay.
And where are these figures from?
All the data here is census data. Thank you for bringing that up. There's the annual census, and the 2020 data is just coming in now, so we still have 2010 data mixed with 2020 data. Then there's something called the American Community Survey, which does survey-based estimates each year and refines the numbers. So in some of these documents, you'll see that there are different base numbers because they're using different sources of data, different years. But we've tried to keep it consistent within an individual expression of data. Did that answer your question?
So where can I look up these numbers? What would I?
If you look in the plan, everything is sourced, so it'll tell you where the data comes from.
Okay.
But this is all census data. Census plus American Community Survey. And you can go there. They have tools. It's easy to find your way around.
Mr. Gillenard,
Sir?
of these people that are Kirk Card, 62 Prospect Ridge, these people who are, quote, cost burdened, how many of them would even qualify for low-income housing? This is really not, is it? It's really not an affordable housing plan. It's a low-income restricted housing plan. So, in fact, if you did the analysis, you'd find that the higher the percentage in the state of Connecticut, the higher the percentage of low-income housing, the higher the cost burdens are. More people are cost burdened. More people are ALICE. So it doesn't, raising the percentage of low-income housing will not cure, will not address this problem that you're talking about here.
All of these people here would qualify at 80% or less.
How many is that? What's the number?
I don't know, I can do the math, but if you add up all of these, and add up all of these, let's see, so it's 582 minus 97 plus 2193 minus 961. It's in the plan, but I'm not gonna stop.
And these people are all living someplace now that is probably naturally affordable, naturally occurring affordable.
No, these are, well,
I mean, they're all living in
it's
Connecticut.
not affordable to them because they're paying more than 30% of their income.
So you think they would move to low-income housing?
We're trying to-
What
I don't
percent
know.
should they be spending?
What should they
No, well,
be?
it says 19% of households earning less than 75% spend 30% or more on housing. What percent, not 30%, which should it be? If you make 75K, how much should you spend on housing?
Well, whatever your income is, the rule of thumb, the understood number, the heuristic in this field is 30%. So you should not be spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, and if you are, you're considered cost burden. Yes?
So how do these people get mortgages if they're not, if they can't pay them back? So a lot of people, I don't know what the rate, what the mortgage is, like what you have to get, what you have to show to get a mortgage. But how do they get approved for a mortgage? Doesn't the mortgage company say, oh, this is more than 30% of your income, you can't get this mortgage?
Well, okay, but not all of them are just buying their houses now. Many of them bought them under different circumstances. Many of them are renters. And many of it, for many people, it depends on how the bank,
Well, right.
30%. It's 30%
That's
or
what I was
more,
asking.
or more. It's at least 30.
Well, then that's a soft number.
30% or more is what it says. It does say.
So that's
No,
what
it doesn't.
Thank you.
Can you go back to the last slide?
all right, to explain it. In Ridgefield, 19% of renters are paying 50% or more of their income on housing. 23% of renters are paying between 30 and 50%. With owners, 11% are paying 50% or more, and 17% are paying between 30 and 50%. All right? Now, we looked at this and we said, well, there are some people who are making a lot of money and maybe spending more than 30% just because it's no big deal to them. Let's take them out of the equation. So that's why we did this here, with these numbers, and we said, let's take out people who are earning more than, who are earning $75,000 a year or more. Let's take people only under $74,999. Under that income, you would qualify for affordable housing. You would qualify in Ridgefield. So all of these households are cost burdened. It's 19%.
Wouldn't the prudent thing be, if you make $75,000, to not live in a place that you can't afford?
Well, what if there is no place that you can afford? That's the issue.
There is. There is.
No, that's.
Yeah, I can show you some neighborhoods.
You said that.
Yeah.
You said the numbers that were circled, you said they qualify for affordable
They
housing?
would qualify.
And who decides who qualifies? Does the state tell us who qualifies, or does
Yes,
the committee?
there's a
Oh, there's a
formula.
formula,
Mhm.
okay. So I like the way you began, because you talked about not letting the state come in and tell us how to do it, and that we should have a lot of say in doing it, and I love that. And this is, you know, trying to help those who are here now,
Yes.
right? I mean,
Sure.
so that's really what the plan is, to help those who are having a hard time now, who are already residents here. And Mr. Connolly mentioned something about perhaps retired or elderly, so I think that should be something that we should look at.
We are looking at.
Good. I'm looking
Retired.
forward to hearing that.
I
Good.
think that's a leap of faith, though.
Absolutely.
Trying to help people.
Absolutely.
To move closer, who are not living here now.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So you have care.
Excuse me, please.
This is Karen Strabone, 53 Main Street. But let's be clear, I don't believe the people in town get a preference for this housing.
Right.
But the whole
Exactly.
presentation right now is based on that.
I
Right now.
understand
But
that, but they
it's
do not get
That's-
priority.
Then why would
Well,
we be
you're
presenting
talking,
them
no,
like
no,
that?
hang on,
He's
hang on.
presenting it that way.
You're talking about public housing. And that's a very different thing than private housing. So there are,
The last presentation we went to, that any of this affordable housing has to be marketed to the person least likely to apply for it.
That's only for public housing, so something under 8-30G does not have the same requirements.
But
So
the
this is
Prospect Ridge,
Prospect Ridge does, yes.
right, so give us an example, who could qualify for Prospect Ridge if that was
Here
built?
now.
Who could, well, first of all, you have
How
to
much?
income qualify.
What is that?
Well, you have to earn less than the threshold. And I don't know what their threshold is different for different units now.
So, but give us a real life example, I wanna know what, like,
Well, I'll tell you that if you're looking at like an 8-30G unit,
not
Or-
8-30, I'm talking about like the
well,
Prospect
I don't know
Ridge.
what their income qualification is because they have various funding mechanisms that have different levels. But I will tell you that there are different levels. There is 80%, which is considered moderate cost. There's 50%, which is considered low cost. And there's 30%, which is considered very low cost. And it's based on the state median income in most cases, which is around $100,000. So that'll give you an idea of what the income threshold would be.
So if we're not, if we're just building affordable housing, not 8-30G, like a whole building of affordable housing, at the very least, it's gonna have to be they have to be making below 80,000.
Yes. And that's
That's
why
on
we
the
looked
high
at
end.
75 on that chart.
But that's really, like Prospect Ridge, it's probably gonna be below 80,000, right? It's gonna be more like 40,000.
Well,
Let's give a real life example.
the,
Like, it's not gonna be for me when I wanna downsize, my mother, anybody, it's
well,
not gonna be for most people. even.
well, that's not necessarily true, yes.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we're taking control of this, then we can present a plan where that would be the case.
Where what would be the case?
What, no?
Careful,
Why?
because
Oh, you
once it's
violate
designated
state
as
law.
affordable
State
housing,
laws.
yeah, it's state,
Oh, okay.
It's
it's not, we
fair,
can't.
fair housing,
Sorry.
fair housing. Act. So,
I'm
yeah.
just trying to help the people,
Yeah.
like we
It gets-
would want to help people like that. So isn't there a way? No, there's no way to.
Well, here's a
Kind of
fact
prioritize?
that
Okay.
most people don't know.
Okay.
That in municipal housing, most of the people who go into it, 70% is the rule of thumb, are people who either lived in that town before they moved into the affordable housing, or had a direct connection to the town, either working there or through family member, or previously lived there, or have some meaningful connection to the town. So even when you open it up, it's still mostly the people in town who live there. And in fact, a number of years ago, the Board of Selectmen said, how many people at Ballard Green are connected to Ridgefield? So we did a survey, and it came out to 70%, so that held true.
Okay.
That's municipal housing in Ridgefield, it's not low-income housing that
No.
we're these
Municipal housing means housing authority housing.
Ballard Green.
That would be Ballard
I was
Green,
wondering,
Prospect
did we come
Ridge.
to a meeting where they said people from outside the community have
Priority,
priority?
that's
People
At
from
Ballard
outside the
Green? I
community
thought
have
that's what
priority?
I thought
No.
somebody
They go on there.
No,
said
that's,
they're on the waiting list.
no, that's not true. The priorities, and it's complicated, the priorities are if you have an emergency situation, something like that, then you'll go up the list. But you can give preference to Ridgefielders as long as you also give preference to people least likely to apply. You can give them points. It's a small amount of points, but there are state statutes that are very specific about this, and I invite you to have the pleasure of looking them up. Can we move forward? Because I wanted to look at this, which was important, which I think is important, because we're talking about housing cost burden. I try to keep these charts out of the presentation, but this is what it says. This is the percentage, or I'm sorry, multiples of income required to buy a house. And the general rule had been 3.3 times. That was the, I guess, the underwriting approach, right? You had to make, you could not spend more than 3.3 times your income on a house. Well, that was not a big problem when house prices were down here. They kicked up in the late 70s and they kicked up in the late 80s. And then in the 90s, boom! And what did they do when people couldn't afford them? They changed they changed the requirements and gave mortgages to people who shouldn't have had them, and then we had the bust. Boom, down we came. Now it's creeping up again, creeping up. This ends in 2018. What do you think has happened since? So, in general, this is US-wide, this is a housing price income ratio, but it's unbalanced now. There is not enough housing, and under the laws of supply and demand, when there's not enough housing, prices go up. That's what we're seeing now. Not enough supply, increasing demand. Housing for employees. This is a survey done at Northwestern in Boston. Of the survey's 87 respondents, over 72% of companies say they have found it extremely or somewhat difficult to recruit and or retain talent in the past 5 years. In addition, 67% claim home prices and rental costs have affected their ability to recruit qualified candidates. I've heard this anecdotally from many people. Like you go into a restaurant and your table isn't getting waited on, and you say to the manager, what's going on? And they say, I just don't have enough waiters. One of the reasons they don't have enough waiters is that there's not enough housing, not enough nearby housing for people. So people have to travel. They would much prefer, of course, to work closer to where they live. And as a result, towns like Ridgefield are struggling to find employees.
Can I ask you where you get the graphs from?
I'm sorry?
Where do you get your graphs from?
Where do I get my graphs from?
Graphs, that's a graph.
This is from Census Data. And everything else that's in the plan, it'll tell you where the data came from. Another measure of need is the waiting list for public housing. Ballard Green, there are 64 units and 73 people on the waiting list. The Meadows, there are 18 waiting for one of the 20 units. Congregate housing, there are 34 units, there are 14 waiting. That seems to go faster because that's for people who need some level of care, and they're more often moving out into a higher level of care. In general affordable units, there are 18 waiting for one of the 34 units. I said, what is the waiting time? Because it's really hard to say. The answer is years. Now, you should understand that this list, sometimes there's fewer names on it, sometimes there's longer names on it. Like they might have an opening and they'll go down the list and they'll find out somebody's not available now, or this person died, or this person no longer needs it. So the lists are constantly being updated, but this was it as of about 2 weeks ago.
What's the net number? Because some of those people are on multiple lists.
I don't know.
How many of them are from Ridgefield?
I don't know.
You sure you don't know?
I am positive I don't know. If you know, you're welcome to tell me.
Well, the net of that is probably about 82. I did an FOA on that back in January, and I found that on average, about half the people were on 2 or more lists, and that of those 82, 16 of them were from Ridgefield.
16 of them actually have current Ridgefield addresses.
That's correct.
That does not include then the people who have a connection to Ridgefield.
We don't know what, there's no way of knowing.
Right.
That's all anecdotal. You'd have no way of knowing
Right.
what that, so you're making it up. The fact is that 16 people are from Ridgefield. 80% of the people are from someplace else. 27% of them are from Danbury, okay? So, but the fact is that you're making it sound like there's a tremendous need that's going unmet in Ridgefield, and there's a small need that's going unmet in Ridgefield. This really exaggerates the local need.
Well, these are the actual numbers.
I know what I'm saying. I'm giving you the actual numbers. That only a small number of these
As I
people.
said, that 18 number does not include people who want to bring their mother to move into Ballard Green.
We don't know that, though. There's no way of knowing that.
You're right. So the number then is, that 18 is kind of a meaningless number.
But you're the one using it.
Right.
No, I'm using the whole, this is the whole list. Yes, some of them are not from Ridgefield. This is the waiting list.
Most are not from Ridgefield.
Yeah.
I don't know what their connection to Ridgefield is.
My understanding, the way you presented it was that I thought that they're all from Ridgefield and they're waiting for this. So So I'm glad that that you said that, because that, the way it's being presented, just so it is as if there's this need in Ridgefield, and they're all from Ridgefield, and they're not. So I appreciate the clarification.
But that, it's just misleading, and that's, you know,
Yeah.
the point.
No, it's not the point, and it's not
Why don't you
misleading.
just look at
Well,
the
I
application?
thought it was misleading.
The
Yeah,
affiliations of
Yeah.
there are a few of us.
The need, we've been looking at numbers, but we also need to look at causes of need. And every week I receive a call, and I know Tony Phillips at Social Services receives multiple calls a week from people who have, say things like this, and these are actual examples. My husband left me and our kids, and he pays me nothing. My landlord is selling the building and wants everyone out. My wife lost her job and we can't live on my income alone. My mom is ailing and we need to keep an eye on her, but we can't move her in with us. I have a chronic illness now and can only work part-time. We're retiring and want to stay in town. These are the stories. These are not people who step forward and advertise their need publicly. But I would guess that everybody in this room knows at least one person who has gone through this. And I know there are in fact many. Let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, 8-30G. As most of you know, if the town has less than 10% of its housing units deed restricted as affordable or in some way government assisted, then developers can circumvent local zoning. I'm sort of shortening it here, but this is basically the effect of it. And build what they want, with the exception being safety or public health. It requires 30% of the units to be set aside for 40 years, and it's available to those earning less than 80% or 50% of the state or area median income, whichever lower. It has to be split equally between 80 and 50. For us to get to 10%, we need 656 units. I can't see that happening for a long time. There is an opportunity for a moratorium. For a moratorium, we would need 102 what's called housing unit equivalent points, more than we have now. And you are awarded different numbers of points for different types of housing. For example, housing for seniors would earn half a point. A 3-bedroom family house would earn 2.5 points. And there are bonuses for different things. This is all set by the state. Yes?
There's bonuses for high density, correct?
There are bonuses.
Bonus points for high density.
High density,
Yes.
meaning,
If you build a high density unit, you get bonus
well, if you
points.
build, it's you know, it encompasses the whole time. Whether you build 2 units or 10 units or 100 units, you still get the same number of units.
But the bonus points for those units, I read that the high density, they give a high
Right.
density bonus.
You get-
So
you-
if you build a building with 40 or 50 units, you get an additional bonus points for those units.
And if less than 40% of the units are for seniors, then those units earn another half point. It's a complicated process,
Right.
but we need another 102 based on what we've got now, and we feel that's within reach.
But it looks like they really don't care about seniors because they only give them half a percent.
Well, I don't think it's that they don't care about seniors, it's that they're concerned that what a lot of towns have done.
Right, it's not really hard.
Shouldn't a senior be worth as much as anyone else? I'm sorry.
Well,
And I'm not even a senior. No offense.
speaking as a senior, I will say that seniors are worth much more, especially than
So you
their
have a
kids.
gripe with
The seniors, especially who are paying their own kids cell phone bills when they're 40 years old.
and that's a part of the problem right
That's
there.
part of the problem.
What is the state, you were starting to say, what is the state's rationale behind?
The state's
those
rationale is that towns tend to circumvent the requirements for affordable housing by building housing only for seniors because they feel it puts less of a demand on infrastructure and traffic.
Of course, that's great.
Well, sure, But if that's all that's built, and I'm not speaking for myself, I'm speaking for the state.
Oh,
The
okay.
state says, if that's all that's built, then we're not going to meet the other needs. So that's why they created this moratorium. Now, on the regular 8-30G side, no matter who lives in it, you still get credit for the number of units. This is strictly on the moratorium side.
Don't you get higher points for, the more financially challenged the person is? Is that not, or is that not true?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
that's a big thing, right? So
Yep.
they make below 50% of the state income
Make
cut
40,
off
right,
at
you get
100.
additional points.
Yeah, so bringing more people in who make less will not enhance the town, it will use more of the town's resources.
Well,
They're not gonna buy as much stuff, they're gonna, or all the taxpayers are gonna be paying for, supplementing everything, their groceries, their rec center members, everything.
wait, how would they be doing that?
If, for the less person, the less they make, they will get state aid for all kinds of things, right?
Well, the
For,
less
For
that
living.
they'll contribute, the less they'll spend.
Right,
And
the
oh, the
less
less they'll
it's
spend,
bringing
but that's,
more
that's,
down.
that's an effect on local business. But the town is not, and the state is not paying for a gym membership and groceries. If they qualified for
for it,
SNAP,
yeah.
then
The
that's
taxpayer.
one thing, but,
The
sorry?
taxpayer will be paying for it.
Yeah, but it doesn't, wherever they live, taxpayers are gonna be paying for that. So, if I can move on. There are other studies that have been done by some other organizations, and these are much more analytical studies that have social science behind them and math and algorithms, and this is what they come up with. Jaffa says we need in Ridgefield about 2260. The Open Communities Alliance say we need 1,241. They're the ones who are pushing for the fair share regulation. The Regional Plan Authority says 1,554. WestCog in their 2008 study said 1345. The truth is, these numbers are these are pie in the sky. I can't imagine how we're going to get to these numbers in any meaningful way within the next 5 or even 10 years.
And this has nothing to do with local need. I think Mr. Conley pointed that out at the meeting. This is about state need being pushed down on town. What it is,
That doesn't make
this is,
sense for Ridgefield.
Yeah, it's Connecticut Housing Needs Assessment,
yeah,
not
this is
Ridgefield.
this is the way to punish towns that are successful and wealthy.
Well,
This is a
that's
punishment.
one way to put it.
Well, that's what it is.
Another way to put it is that the state is short about 87,000 housing units, and they have to come from somewhere. And in the past, what's been done is they've all been shoehorned into low-income communities because nobody else wants them. And again, I'm not speaking for myself.
They're not low income, they're affordable communities.
And not speaking
Remember
from,
that.
speaking for the state and not myself, they want to see more municipalities take some responsibility for affordable housing. And that's why, for example, this fair share law is. And I don't support the fair share law, but I'm telling you their reasoning behind it. Yes, in the back.
Hi, Dave, Andrea Levy, Main Street. What I don't understand with all of this, and maybe you can explain it to me, why are we building tens of thousands of units statewide when we have a decreasing population in this state? People are moving out of this state. The population from 10 years ago has declined, I don't know, 500,000 people?
Well, it's leveled off. We're not losing population we were, and in fact, Fairfield County is growing. It's the only part of the state that hasn't been growing.
So we're gonna get punished, is what you're saying, because we're the area that's growing. The rest of the state is depopulating, and so Hartford and Bridgeport and all the other municipalities that are losing people, we are gonna have to start supplementing that in our town with our taxes. And I like the point you made, because they move here, they don't have the money to spend here.
They're not really
The businesses are
spending.
gonna get hurt,
Right,
because they're not spending money
They
on
can't
Main
afford to
Street.
live here.
So I wanna
Why do they
know,
Or,
how can you continue to build units statewide when our population is decreasing? That's my question right there.
because there still exists great need. And one of the reasons population is decreasing is because people can't find affordable housing.
No, people are leaving the state with the high taxes and moving
Okay.
elsewhere.
Fine. Let's save that for another discussion.
So you can just avoid it.
Inconvenient.
So to be clear, like, That's not a local, like, all those things are not local, that's what the state is saying.
The state
Right.
says
I don't
you
think we
have
can
to
hold
do it,
the
right.
chairman responsible for what the state is
Yeah.
Well, they
saying.
will.
No,
do it.
Is there any way to fight against this?
Right, you're,
To fight against what?
This?
right, Amy.
To
This
fight-
whole, yeah, this whole thing that you were talking about, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, why would someone wanna come and live here if they can't afford to live here? I
Well-
mean, when you go to a restaurant in Ridgefield, you have to be able to afford to go. Nobody
Right.
pays for my dinner when I go for dinner.
Sure.
I pay for it, I'm a public school
Sure,
teacher.
Sure.
So, you know, I don't make
Well,
millions,
then
but I
they-
worked very hard with my husband in order to be able to buy a house here in 2005. Before that, I rented an apartment in Harrison, New York. I couldn't live here then, and I didn't expect that I should live here until I could afford it. So is there any way to fight against this?
Well, yes, there's a way to fight against
Okay.
it, which is to go through your legislators,
Oh,
because these are
okay.
state
So,
regulations.
yeah, oh, well, no is the answer.
If I may, to that
That's
point,
right, that ain't going.
Roger Mustino from Prospect Ridge, he's right. It goes to who we send to Hartford.
Right.
And let me mention the two things that he mentioned that could be voted on in General Assembly, that fair share one and municipalities taking control. State Senator Julie Kushner from Danbury in committee voted in favor of that. When the state Senate district for Ridgefield changes coming up, if she is reelected, she will represent the state Senate for the entire northern half of Ridgefield. Our own state representative currently is very wishy-washy on how she will vote on the General Assembly floor in the coming weeks for those two bills. She will do what party leadership tells her to do.
And there it is.
It starts by fighting who we send to Hartford.
Yeah.
Vote better in November.
So,
Oh, yeah.
if we could come back to the affordable housing plan, if you don't mind. So the current housing situation is that we have approximately 10,000 units. 80% of the units are single family. There are 152 that are managed by, and owned and managed by the Housing Authority, and there are 286 affordable under 8-30G, which includes the RHA units. Let me try to move back to that.
I'm sorry, and just a question, do we know, I know this doesn't count towards 8-30G, but the naturally, Kirk mentioned this before, the naturally occurring, non-deed restricted, do we know what percentage of our housing stock would meet those criteria, which is not deed restricted? And if you don't, you know, I don't.
There was some research done on that, I can dig up that
That'd be interesting
number
just to
for
see,
you.
yeah.
We're 656 units away from our 10%.
Yeah, that's not gonna solve it.
But the problem is, if it's counted,
Yeah.
it has to be restricted.
Of course.
And the reason that it has to, you know, people say, why can't we count things that are, you know, market rate, but like an ADU that is relatively affordable, close to the affordable rate? There are two reasons. One is that you can't ensure then that the person who's living in it is income qualified. I can be making $125,000 a year and living in an ADU that costs me, you know, $1,400 and might qualify as affordable, but it's not considered affordable unless an affordable tenant is living in it. And the other is that prices, income and housing prices do not move on the same track. So something may be affordable now, it might be NOAA naturally occurring affordable housing, it might be NOAA now. Down the line, housing prices go up, income doesn't quite go up as much, comes down, up, down. So there's no guarantee that it stays affordable. There is a potential loophole that we have found, and we're going to talk about that later on, if we get there. The housing market itself, pretty simple, this is no surprise. Listings are down. Poor Lonnie Shapiro is practically knocking on doors and begging people to sell their house. Prices are up, and this ends in 2020. We know what's happened since then. And last year, there were 114 units rented at a median rent of $2,500. Single-family sales, there were 482 sold, median price $799. Condo sales, 83 sold, median price $265. These are higher than people who would qualify for affordable housing can afford. And what that tells us is something that's pretty obvious, which is the market will not build affordable housing. If we want to have affordable housing, we have to be proactive in creating it.
Even when we're so close, because if you were making 75,000, 30% of that is 1,850, right? So we're so close to 2,500.
Yeah, right, even if you're close.
So close.
Right.
Right. So there
Yep.
are a lot of lower, that's not,
There is some, yeah.
there's not that many.
So-
lower rent.
We know there's need. How much need, there's argument about it, but we know there is need. We know we can't possibly meet it now. So what we said was, like, if we came up with a plan, here, we're gonna give you a plan for 2,500, that's ridiculous. We couldn't do it, it would never pass. Let's be realistic. Let's find out, let's figure out what we can actually achieve, which seems to us to be a rational way to go about this. And we said, all right, what if we do nothing? What if, for the next 5 years, we do nothing and 8-30G remains intact? Based on the historical record, we will get about 17 units of deed-restricted affordable housing if we do nothing. If we make zoning and infrastructure changes, well, new units in Branchville, we think there could be 10. We think, thanks to middle housing and adaptive reuse, which we'll talk about shortly, we could be looking at 5 to 10 new units. But what if we're proactive? What if we actually do things and take steps to create housing? With disability, restricted, and group home, we might dig up 8 units. New construction on town property might yield us 70 units. And incentives to deed restrict ADUs and NOAA, which gets to what you're talking about, could get us 10 units, which could get us, we believe, reasonably 125 units in the next 5 years. So now we're going to talk about strategies and tactics. How do we get there?
But can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Can you go back and address the middle housing? Because the way I read that, that's kind of right up with desegregate Connecticut, with changing zoning laws and building multifamily houses within neighborhoods, and they refer to that as the middle housing and
Yeah,
adaptive
we're going to get
reuse.
to that in detail a little later on, if you don't mind holding back.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Did you have a question, Kirk?
No,
Or
it's
you just moving the camera? So how do we get there? So more assisted housing, meaning housing that is either built with government funding or the tenant gets some kind of assistance. Things that we can do include expanding Ballard Green using undeveloped acreage. There are approximately 2.2 acres on that property that are not being used. The reason that it's limited to the units that are there right now is because of zoning. So with zoning changes or with a friendly 8-30G, additional units could be built there. Pursue the Prospect Ridge development. This is the property that we've been talking about. This is on hold until after this process is done. But this is the property below the soccer fields, adjacent to the baseball fields and dog park on Prospect Ridge. It's pretty steeply pitched, but we've got to go ahead from the Board of Selectmen to pursue a grant for a feasibility study to build more affordable housing there. The first thing we did was to do a site suitability study. Could the environment and terrain support it? So we hired an engineer, and the engineer said this area here, the area you see dotted, which amounts to about 5 of 15 acres, would be suitable for development for affordable housing. And we just guesstimated you could put about 70 units on that without overcrowding it. The third was that there's a lot at the corner of Halpin Lane and Prospect Ridge. You can see it right there. It is a little more than half an acre. And the town granted Ability Beyond, which is a nonprofit that helps people with disabilities, the right to build another sunrise cottage there. But since that was done, some things have changed. The forget what it's called, but the State Department that supervises this does not like to have so-called segregated housing for people with disabilities. Plus, there needs to be money generated to run programs. So we've been talking with Ability Beyond, we've been talking with Habitat about the idea of using this to develop a combination of some market rate and some housing for people with disabilities, where the market rate would help subsidize some of the cost of the units that are for, and programming for people with disabilities. So that's something that's currently in discussion now.
Got a question?
Of course.
Jim Garrow, I have to live at Quail Ridge, but we'll put that aside. Ballard Green, the property you're talking about, has it been looked at and is it buildable? Has anybody looked at it?
Yes, I've looked at it. It appears buildable.
Appears, okay.
I've spoken to the head of the housing authority. He knows the property and believes it to be buildable. The constraint has been the number of units on the property.
My question is, why, if it's buildable, why don't you put that as your priority and get as many units in there as you can to get into your total?
Well, we want to. That's why it's here.
Well, how many are you gonna, what was the net projected number?
That we can fit there, we don't know. It has to
Okay.
be surveyed and there's no money for that.
Next question.
But you had a number for the middle one.
The
You
next-
hadn't
Right,
anything
because
over
money
there.
was spent on that.
The next question I have is, why are we taking Prospect Ridge from that yellow block and all the way down to the open space and putting all of this affordable housing in the same neighborhood? It's supposed to be affordable housing so people can live other places besides Prospect Ridge. And I find that concentrated in all on one location, you're putting all of those people, the affordable people, in one neighborhood. A little more diversity is needed.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but that's the property that's available, so that's what we have to work
It's
on.
not available.
It's not available yet.
It's not available, the town still owns it, and they said they weren't. I watched the BOS presentation the other night, and that's why I'm kind of surprised to hear you talking about Ballard Green, because they said it's not zoned, and that the area right now that you're talking about was area that they needed to build. So they needed to put their equipment on the area where you're
No.
talking about building, and that's why it's zoned that way, and it's not zoned for building,
They
it's
were
not
talking
planned.
about putting equipment at the old schoolhouse, which is what they have
Oh,
now.
well, he said it was zoned that way to build. That's what Bob Hebert said in that meeting. And then they also referring to Prospect Ridge said they haven't given you the property nor said they would.
No,
give
they
it.
haven't given us the property, but they've given us
Well, that was
the-
way back when.
no.
That was last year when we had that meeting. But they haven't
Yes.
given you the property, so Bob said, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse talking about this because they haven't given you the property yet.
Well, they're not gonna give us the property unless we can, it's a question, it's a catch-22
I
then.
suppose.
But what the Board of Selectmen agreed to do, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, is to allow us to do a feasibility study for development on that property, to come back with results and recommendations, and the Board of Selectmen will make a decision.
Yeah, I think this is all potential. This isn't, there's a plan to build right here, right now.
No.
So
But
you're
it's
right
hard
about
that
the,
it's in the plan though, it's in the plan as, I'm just concerned that we're gonna be submitting this plan to Hartford, and half of this stuff in it is unattainable. You know, I mean, I get we're trying to come up with ideas,
What's on
but
the
this.
table?
Well,
Prospect
Prospect
Ridge.
Ridge.
How is it unattainable?
Ballard Green.
How is it unattainable?
Do we have time to do the feasibility studies before June 1st?
We don't need to do feasibility studies before June 1st, because
Oh,
this plan just recommends, if we ever get there, you'll see that we continue the feasibility study. But I
So
would like
maybe-
somebody to tell me why we could not build on that land.
It's not the point, it's not, we're not the town has not given it to all of us to build on yet. It's still being decided.
Well, the town said to us, we're not gonna give it to you to build on unless we know more about it, and that's what the feasibility study is.
I have a point of order.
Okay.
The reason, Greg Kabasakalian, Washington Avenue, that you don't have that property is because you need to get that property by virtue of the town. The town has to grant you that property. That property was set aside for recreation open space, not this. In my opinion, look, you've done a lot of good work on this. I read it in depth today. That should be a prototype, okay? This is a beta example. Prospect Ridge shouldn't even be a part of the discussion, quite frankly.
Why?
Because the plan is strategic, and we've had this discussion before, Mr. Goldenberg. This is tactical. You are putting bulldozers on that property. You don't own that property yet. And it's the people in this room who are going to say no to that.
We are putting no bulldozers on there, we're saying continue the feasibility study. That's all we're saying. We're not.
It feels like, and maybe this is a point of distinction, when you hear plan, the natural inclination is like, so we're planning to do this is all gonna happen. I see this, and tell me if this is different, this is all potential, right? Because you're right, like, the Ballard Green, there's a zoning issue there. You can't just go do that now, you don't have permission to do that now. Could that happen? Potentially, yes. The same thing is true with Prospect Ridge. The town still owns that has not given up for this, but there's a feasibility study. That may happen, that may not happen. So is that a helpful distinction for people? Like, there's no one coming and saying, we have plans, we're like picking out colors and bulldozers to go knock down the trees to build all this stuff. This
That's
is
what it looks like.
Actually,
that's what I'm
Maybe
trying to.
and that had been done at one of the previous meetings. Dave showed lovely facades saying, this color would be good and this was nice. And they were not even talking, it was before the study had happened. It was about 6 months ago, maybe more.
It was the guardrails on the meeting to say, well, what should we consider as part of the feasibility
No,
study?
he was selling it.
Are there any concerns in the town about picking an area that really is for children to play sports in? Like, that area has there's the dog park, there's the baseball
Those
field.
would remain untouched.
East Ridge.
No, I know they would. I'm asking I'm asking the room, I guess. Are there any concerns about building affordable housing in an area where the children are playing? And the children are,
I think
that,
yeah, it's the biggest concern.
You're worried that the poor people are a danger to your children?
I'm sorry.
You're putting words in someone's mouth.
What is
You should apologize to her.
That's so rude.
Apologize to her.
Calm down.
Excuse me.
Calm down.
Excuse me. I'm in the middle of asking the room something. You have some nerve saying that to me. I understand that, but that's
All
not,
right,
those are not the words.
You weren't answering the question. You were making an
Order.
accusation.
Excuse me.
Hey, no, hey, I'm running this meeting.
How dare you say that?
Hey, sir, could you please sit down? Like, this is not helpful.
I can sit down.
I said,
I'm
why
giving you
would
a weird
you-
look.
You're pointed at me.
Wait, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I'm running this meeting. The rule that I said was we would be civil.
Okay, well then he wasn't civil. That was rude, because that's not what I said. I was in the middle of talking, and you had some nerve saying that to me, quite frankly.
Okay, that's what you
And
asked,
now,
you asked the room, does anybody have concerns about putting affordable housing next to where our children play? That's what you asked.
you know what, I apologize. I understand now. I didn't understand the way it sounded. I
I
apologize.
didn't mean to attack you.
I absolutely didn't mean it that way, so that's why I got upset. So I apologize. When you read it back to me, that doesn't sound very good, and that's not what I meant. I apologize.
Okay.
What I meant was,
Yes.
is there concern, was there any discussion about building in an area that was designated for children and sports and play? That's all I meant. That's all I meant.
But the point that Dave was making is that the existing facilities that are there are gonna remain untouched, even under this plan that's, is
Oh,
we
no.
consider as feasible.
I understand that. I'm saying, is there any concern building that where that's the area that the kid, you know what I mean? Like, you could use that instead to make another field perhaps, or do you know what I'm saying?
Well,
That's all I'm
the-
saying.
the-
Okay.
Parks and Rec, so the Parks and Rec Commission have said that they don't have problems with this doing this.
Okay, thank you. So it's been.
I'm sorry?
talked
It's been
about.
discussed.
And I would also
Say that
say,
again?
from the selectmen,
Yes.
before the town would hand that over, there would be public input on that.
Okay.
There wouldn't be something the board of selectmen would just say, boom,
Sure,
here you
go
go.
ahead.
That would have to go through its
I
whole
understand.
process.
Okay,
And
I
that
apologize
process
for
is
getting
just getting
upset.
underway. But we're just, all this plan recommends is that we move forward with the process. Yes, sir.
Yes, Jack Wells, 73 Ivy Hill Road. I agree with what she said. It may not have come out the way she wanted it to, but we have 35 acres of open land near the center of town. It's the last area of open land in the center of town. It already has 2 apartment buildings on Prospect Ridge, which are 3 stories high. One which is built 10 feet off the road with the sidewalk on the other side of the picket fence, which is stupid. That's what we're doing in this town. We gotta be very careful. We're putting everything in building in the last 10 years on that side of town, on that road. We have churches, we have ball fields, we have condos, we have just about everything. And if you do a swath right across to Sunset Lane, to Quarry Ridge,
To the rail trail.
all that area right through there has all been built up. We can't take any more through there.
Yeah.
There's no sidewalks on the roads, it's kind of dangerous, so yeah, kids playing. They can't even walk from East Ridge Middle School, again, another school, we have 2 schools.
There will be,
They're all that stuff.
there will be ample discussion, ample opportunity to discuss that. Once the feasibility study has become, that will answer a lot of these questions.
You spent $3,000 of the 50 already, and you did a feasibility study, and you had plans drawn by an engineer and architect. Have you done a feasibility study on Ballard Green? Have you done a feasibility
Not yet.
study on Halpin Lane?
Not
Have
yet.
you done a feasibility study on the things we talked about in the past down on Branchville?
Route 7.
Well, Branchville, there was a big study done in
So what's the
2017.
problem with that?
You need sewer,
Sewer.
you need sewer.
Well, we're going to get to Branchville. I would really love to get to this presentation. But I just want to assure you that anything that goes on at Prospect Ridge will have to go through a separate process. All this plan does is recommend that we continue the process. A lot of the questions will be answered by the feasibility study, and everybody in town will have multiple opportunities for input on that.
So, but just to clarify, there's only been one feasibility study on that one property. There's been no feasibility study on the other 2? Ballard Green and Halpin Lane?
Right, because we
Why?
just thought of those.
So you picked that one first, that's the one that's
We
first?
started this one a while ago,
Okay.
yes.
So, but there will be feasibility studies on the other one?
There should be, it could be,
Well,
yeah.
they're on your presentation.
You
Yes.
have 50 grand, you only spent 3, so you probably should spend some.
No,
Yeah,
we're-
especially, that'd be
We're
great.
confined to this one property, but there could be money for other
Why
other
are you
feasibility
confined to
studies.
that one property?
Because that's what the grant was for. We received a grant
Oh.
to study that one property. Any other questions on this before we move on to the next item? Oh, okay, Kurt, thinking you're raising your hand. Okay, so that was talking about assisted units. How do we get to more deed-restricted units? One idea is called adaptive reuse, and that's where you take a building that was created for one purpose and use it for something else. That property on Bailey right now, that they want to, well, they're not actually going to convert it into apartments, that's going to be a tear down, I think. But this is an example of adaptive reuse where they took a school and they turned it into 50 units for seniors. I think, you know, what we've done at the Playhouse area now, that's all been adaptive reuse because that was school, now it's offices. So there are opportunities in town for adaptive reuse. Extend 8-30G to perpetuity. Right now it's 40 years. There's no reason that it can't go to perpetuity and beyond. Create a housing trust fund, which means that a fund is established, funds are collected for it, it is managed by a board and overseen, in our recommendation, by the Board of Selectmen. So there's a recommendation out there for this, but that will move forward once this whole process is complete. Incentivize ADU deed restrictions. So right now we have ADUs going up, and we have a bunch of them in town, and it's been pointed out, many of them are close to naturally occurring affordable housing. Why can't we deed restrict them? So we went to the Department of Housing and we said, you know, an owner who has to deed restrict this for 10 years or 40 years has an encumbrance on their property. If they try to sell it, that's going to reduce the market value. But what if we said it was a covenant under which it would be deed restricted as affordable for the duration of your tenure there, and it expires with the transfer of the property? Or maybe even it's renewable every 5 years. Would that be countable towards 8-30G? And the answer was yes. So this is good to know. It's a possibility. We would need to work to create some kind of incentive because, as we talked about, affordable means that somebody lives in it who qualifies. That would put some reporting obligations onto the owner, the landlord. So there should be some compensation in terms of, I know you're gonna hide when I say this, but some sort of tax incentive for doing that. But that is an actual possibility now. Require set aside for Main Street Design District. You know where the elms are, or the elms used to be, and we now have all those units. And there were 5 houses that went up across from that at the corner of Gilbert and Main. Not one of those units is affordable. Not one. The town said, okay, you can apply this floating design district here, build up to 6 units per acre. We have no affordable requirement. Oh, you can have 2 additional units if you deed restrict them, but there's no incentive to do that if you think about it. Many towns have what's called an inclusionary zoning regulation. What that says is, if you're going to build X, then you're going to have to build X% of X as affordable or make a payment to a housing trust fund. Many, many towns have that. It's called inclusionary zoning. And we believe that the MSDD regulation should be changed to require either a set-aside for affordable or a payment in lieu. And what that payment in lieu might look like, it's like the person who built those 5 luxury houses on one lot at the corner of Main and Gilbert, they're not going to put an affordable unit there, but they might make a $50 or $100 or whatever the requirement is, $1,000 contribution to a trust fund in lieu of doing it. Any questions on this?
I just had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Andrea?
Dave, can you explain the trust fund? If you're
Sure.
paying in a $50,000 to $100,000 into a trust fund, where does that money go? And
All
what
right.
does it do?
The money goes into a fund that the town owns and manages. Then there is a board set up that will be appointed probably by the Board of Selectmen and have people from various parts of the community that will be responsible for administrating the grants. And grants can be given for a variety of things. It could be used to, remember when I talked about creating an incentive for somebody to deed restrict an ADU? It could go to that. It could go to a loan program to create ADUs if they'll deed restrict them as affordable. It could go to be loans for down payments. It could be used actually to build affordable housing. There's an unlimited variety of things that this board would have to determine. Then that board would have to create an annual report, and it would have oversight by the Board of Selectmen.
Well, that one makes the most sense to me. If you're going to take in money for a trust fund because you're not building units or ADUs, then that money to me should go to building new units, not to feasibility studies, not to grants, not to any of that. I think that if we're going to put the money where we all feel it belongs, is in building good units that people need, and use the money from a trust fund towards that. I don't think that we should, I think we get too committee deep in this town, and a lot of things, and we come to these meetings and we get frustrated, and maybe things are said that shouldn't be said, or whatever. But in the end, we all want what's best for the town. And what's best for the town is not a bunch of money going into a checking account that's not being used for what it should be used, which is to build more affordable units.
No, this has very, very strict requirements about it.
But you just said feasibility studies and grants. If we're gonna take money from builders to incentivize them to build deed-restricted units or 8-30 or whatever, then that money should really be going to building units for people that need them.
Right, but sometimes you have to do feasibility studies or planning work, pre-development work, before you can develop. So it really depends on the development itself. But it could go, for example, to buy deed restrictions for existing units. There's another way to do it.
That, to me, that makes much more sense than just having money just sitting in an account without.
No, it does not just sit in an account, it's active. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of housing trust funds around, and it's worth reading up on them. Some of them are very active, and it's all transparent to the town through the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Following on this question, I want to talk about the fees that you want to charge the builders or the developers.
Mhm.
So let's say I'm a developer and I want to develop six units. And none of them will be deed restricted, none of them will be affordable housing, and I say, I'm gonna pay the bid. I'm gonna pay you, and you're gonna do what you do with that money. What am I gonna do to my price, my selling price? It's going up, because I'm not paying. Okay, I'm gonna pass it on to the consumer. And we see this every day, we see it, go to Stop and Shop today. That's what's happening, that's called inflation, okay? And if you artificially put a fee on something, the corporation ain't paying it, the consumer is. So you're going to raise the price of units in this town by doing such a thing.
Right, we've raised the cost to the developer, but that's the price of,
Okay,
if they
well,
want to
we're
develop.
I'm gonna try this one more time. The developer may write you a check, but he ain't paying it. He's gonna pass that on to the guy buying that property.
Yeah, pro forma,
Okay?
yeah.
So, and the price of that unit is going up.
Sure.
That's economics 101. You got that?
Probably.
Okay, good.
So now it's not.
Or you mean, choose not to develop?
I just had a question about the first bullet point, promote adaptive reuse. Has that been looked into? Are there any buildings in the town that we could reuse, or? 'Cause
We
that's
haven't looked into actual buildings
Oh,
in town, but something like the one on the corner of Bailey, Bailey and Grove Street, not Prospect Street, that old barn thing. We had our eyes on that for a while, but somebody kind of pulled the rug out from under us. That would have been a perfect example.
But maybe there are others
Oh,
here, you know?
I'm sure there are others, yes.
Okay.
As somebody who had a relative in Congregate House, has spent a lot of time in the schools, in our police department, in our town hall, the town is a lousy landlord. They're terrible at this. Why do we want to keep doing this?
Well,
Look at the Meadows, for example. Why do we want to be in that business? We're really bad at it.
well, it's the housing authority that's in the business.
No,
which is-
the town is a terrible landlord, flat, period, full stop.
The town does not technically own those properties. They're owned and operated by the Ridgefield Housing Authority.
How's that working out?
Well, you have to talk to them, sometimes well,
I'm talking
sometimes
to
not
you
so well.
because some of these started with you, they were your baby, you handed them off, they're failing.
Right.
Why?
We don't have to go with the housing authority. For example, Prospect Ridge.
But your own grant application said that the housing authority was gonna take over whatever it is you built.
At the time, that was the thought.
No, you took state money with that premise.
At the time, that was the thought.
Is that no longer the thought?
At the time, that was the thought.
You're ducking.
And no, I'm just trying to finish a statement.
Go ahead.
At the time, that was the thought. We learned more, and then we began to think maybe the housing authority is not the ideal person to develop and manage this. So there are nonprofit developers who could do the same, and I guarantee you 100% that the state would not care one way or the other.
But would the town?
We would.
What's that?
Would the town care one way or another?
What difference does it make to the town?
Oversight? More than half of what you put up on this slide is the town owning it.
Right.
No.
We're owning or buying it down, we're owning it one way or another.
No.
And we're increasing the cost, as Greg said, of other units to get there.
No.
Uh-huh.
Just that.
Adaptive reuse is very often done privately. 8-30G is private. Housing Trust Fund can work with private or public. ADU deed restriction is with private. This is private. So that doesn't, the town's not the landlord in this. So, anything else? Other regulatory changes. Inclusionary zoning regulation. I mentioned what this was. We are allowed under state law to require builders to set aside things as affordable or make a payment in lieu. We don't do it, other towns do it and are successful with it.
Which other towns do it?
Westport, New Canaan, Darien.
How long have they been doing it for?
I don't know. Come to the Housing Trust Fund meeting when we talk about that.
We already have a committee for this?
I'm sorry?
We have a committee for this already?
Well, it's on our agenda when we get there, but here we're talking about advancing the housing trust fund. This is not a proposal for a housing trust fund. This is more of an overall plan for affordable housing for the town. Allow middle housing, and this is something I want to talk about for a second. You've heard about maybe the term the missing middle. What Ridgefield does is like what many towns do, is you go from high density right to 1, 2, and 3 acre zoning. Many towns have a transitional area between where there is some sort of what's called middle housing, or some sort of low-level multifamily housing. Usually it's in the form of duplexes, triplexes, sometimes fourplexes, sometimes there's cottage courts or pocket neighborhoods, which means a cluster of houses with open space around them. These are alternatives that can provide more housing, but in a transitional zone where it's suited. So we recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission look into allowing middle housing in certain areas of certain types.
Dave, quick question.
Sure.
Andrea, middle housing, would that be built on what's considered open space now, or would it be going in, buying up a cluster of homes, raising them, and then building it there? Because as this gentleman said up here on Ivy Hill, we're losing our open space. I mean, we saw the open space map last week at the Board of Selectmen meeting. You know, slowly, we're not gonna have open space left.
No, if something's restricted open space, it's not available for development.
But you're looking at, say, Prospect Ridge, which is town-owned, open space, and a
It's
lot
not
of
open space.
around
It's
it.
Prospect Ridge is counted as open space because it's not developed, but it's not restricted as open space. Anything that's restricted as open space cannot be developed.
So when you're talking about these middle housing,
We're talking about basically
you're talking about
taking
going into a
existing,
neighborhood and
taking
taking down
existing
homes.
properties, generally takes existing properties and converts them into duplexes, triplexes, sometimes fourplexes, within a specific limited area.
So it requires a zoning change.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Back to the trust funds, you said Westport and New Canaan, neither of those have a trust fund? Greenwich just started talking about.
No, they have
that one?
inclusionary zoning.
No, we were talking about specifically the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which towns have that?
Fairfield, New Canaan.
New Canaan does not.
If you know, this is not a test, this is your
It's
test.
not a
I will
test,
send you the
You're
list
telling us that this is a
of towns.
wonderful
I don't have
approach
it
that
in
other
my
towns.
memory right now.
David, you said other towns have done this.
Yes,
Cool.
I don't have it in my memory.
Can you get back to us with that information? please?
Absolutely, we have a whole housing trust fund proposal, I'll be happy to send you. Yes.
Is there any, I'm still thinking about that existing, bullet point from before. Is there anything on Route 7, any area there? Because that's got a nice Route 7 and it's better for traffic. Is there
Yeah.
anything on Route 7?
There's some, yes.
Rather than Prospect Ridge is like sticking it in there with all that traffic. Could we go, take that plan
Yeah.
and look out on Route 7 instead? If there is anything on there.
Part of my job at the committee was to look at sites.
Oh, okay.
And always I had Route 7 in my mind.
Yeah, because that's.
Because there's a lot of businesses down there that aren't
that would-
successful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I thought, this is great. Well, when I actually got into it, that's ready.
Well, where does our line end?
You know the Ridgefield Motor Inn? That's ready, even though it's called Ridgefield. So the only parts of it that I could find that were actually Ridgefield were in areas that were kind of swampy and all that.
Well, and a lot of the property is owned by the state. But there are some areas where it's possible and that should be
Yeah,
looked
that
at.
would be a great.
Should be looked at as well. As well as Branchville, which
Yeah,
we're going
that's
to talk
what,
about
that's
in a
what's
minute.
sticking in my head. Could we write that down somewhere? Like, who's writing down suggestions? That would be a great suggestion.
Yeah, no, we're thinking about that.
Okay, good.
We're looking into it.
And explore form-based codes. Form-based codes are based on the recognition that what concerns people most about buildings, especially in town, is not what they're used for, but how they look. So what form-based codes do is set very specific structural and aesthetic requirements, but allow a lot of freedom about what goes in there. So this is something that we're recommending that they look at, that the Planning and Zoning Commission looks into. Any more questions about this page? Transit-oriented development. So in 2016, 2017, we got a grant to do a study of Branchville for transit-oriented development. It's available at the WestCog site. And it's interesting reading if that sort of thing interests you. It's a market-based approach. In other words, it's not about the town acquiring property and building, it's about changing zoning regulations so that owners can build higher density. It can be done with or without the new sewage option. Now, sewage is the issue there, right? There's no sewers there, so high density cannot go in as now. Some limited additional density can go in if you look at the study, but there are opportunities to connect perhaps with Reading and use some of their excess capacity. So this is something that Planning and Zoning received in 2017. Nothing has been done on it. It's time to move it forward because there's a great opportunity to do transit-oriented development in Branchville and really turn it into the second town center that Ridgefield has been wanting for years.
So I would push back to say nothing has been done. So there's some state work that's being done.
Yes, could you explain about
So there's some state work that will be done right at that corner of Branchville Road and Route 7 there by where the little pub was, or now the Lantern 2 is, with the idea of creating an environment that would be more friendly to this kind of development. So it's not this development, but crosswork, there's obviously some bridge work that needs to be done there, lighting, crosswalks, all those kinds of things to make it more palatable to have people walk around, with the idea that you create housing where people can come in and not necessarily even require cars, right? They can take the trains back and forth. A lot of other neighborhoods like that. So some work has been done, at least connected to that idea of this, but with this study in mind. And I think this study was used to get some of the grants for that.
That's great. Yes?
Another question, Dave, if you don't mind. So you're talking about possibly tying into Reading, but from what I've been reading and hearing, they've said no about tying into their sewers. I mean, does Rudy have some golden ball that he developed that we don't know about? Does he have an agreement with Reading? Because my understanding is, talking to my friends in Reading, they don't want it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Krista, I'm part of the committee. I spoke with Julia Pemberton, the first selectman, and she wants us to get an estimate for what our requirements would be for sewage, and they will consider it.
But does that have to go to a Reading town referendum? Because my friends in Reading are not for this.
Well,
Is this a state thing, or is this a town thing?
this is a town thing, and the problem is towns don't work together when they should. And what we're pushing for is the towns to work together and try to recognize Branchville as a regional hub. It includes Reading and Wilton. And by getting us all to work together, which we're trying to do, we may be able to move that.
But I see that more in Georgetown than Branchville, because I used to work down in Georgetown, and that was kind of a tri-town little area. So they all kind of had to work together with the wire mill situation. But Branchville, a lot of people, my friends in Reading say Branchville is Ridgefield. So why are we getting involved in Ridgefield?
Well,
Because we would rather get involved with Georgetown
Yeah.
and seeing the wire mill redone.
That's the kind of small thinking, though, that has predominated so far. But when you look at it really,
I mean, people are entitled to their belief system and their rights, and this is where they live in Reading. And, you know, they don't understand why are they going to be giving up some of their sewer capacity to Ridgefield and Branchville. I mean, Krista, maybe you can answer that for me.
Well, I think the wire mill does not require, may not require all of the sewage capacity, that they may have, they want to evaluate it with this extra information that we're going to give them, because I think there will be extra capacity, and if the capacity sits there unused, they're paying a lot of money for that sewage system without it being used.
So does that go to a town referendum, or is that just something that the town can decide to do?
The answer is they built the sewage plant in Reading 15 or so years ago when they first decided to try to redevelop the wire mill site. And the plan at that point that Reading had signed off on was, I don't know, it was like 500 housing units, and there was going to be mixed-use development and all of this stuff.
But then it went bankrupt.
And then it went
Now
bankrupt,
there's all
but-
this financial
they have,
unraveling you're having to do down there.
they
That's
have
a
this
fundamental
gigantic
problem,
sewage
so.
treatment system that's not being used, but it costs a tremendous amount of money to run it. It's being subsidized by the taxpayers in Reading to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars
So
a
they
year.
basically would rent it out to Ridgefield, is
Yeah.
what you're saying?
That would be, that's what we,
So who's
who would
gonna
pay
pay the
for it?
rental
Yeah.
fee?
we would.
We would,
For
right?
food.
Not the new builders,
I know, it
not
would,
the
and it
trust
would,
fund.
but it would be passed
Everyone
along
would
to the
pay
ultimate
it.
users the same way sewage, fees are paid by Ridgefield residents for Ridgefield's,
Usage.
plant.
So for anybody who has a hookup
Very
to a
well.
sewer in Reading, they would be paying the sewer fees, not the rest of the town.
Right.
Thank you.
But to get, just if I can finish my point that I was making a minute ago. Like right now we're thinking Branchville, that's Ridgefield. Georgetown, that's Reading. But the truth is there's a whole corridor there. And we have to think of it holistically, but we can't because we're hiding behind the fences of our towns. That's what I mean by small thinking. If we can work together as towns, we can solve these problems on a very small regional basis to everybody's benefit. We have excess capacity here. Well, what can we give them in return? I mean, there's obviously if we work together and we think together, we can solve more problems than if we just build fences around our communities.
So the thing,
Yeah.
in Georgetown, and it's just because I've worked down there for many years, and with the whole wire mill thing going on, and they were building the newer sewer capacity, there was always that conundrum of, okay, what part is Reading, what part is Wilton, and what part is Ridgefield? There was never really any clear-cut line of who really managed what street, what house, or whatever down there. And then the wire mill, it was being done privately to build like a little village down there. And then that got caught up into bankruptcy and everything else, and I know that Ms. Pemberton, is that her name?
Julie Conkin.
I've gone to some meetings in Reading, and I give her a lot of credit for trying to find ways to get out from under that financial mess. I give her a lot of credit for that. But why are we getting involved in it until they settle their issue down there first? Because it would make more sense to me if Reading came to us and said, okay, we've worked it out with the banks, we know what we're gonna do with the wire mill, we know what their capacity is gonna be, this is what we will have left after they go into place. Why are we putting the cart before the horse?
I think,
It's not, it's putting down a marker that when they do all of that, and it seems likely that there will be excess capacity,
But I
that
was
would
asking
present,
her.
that would present an
asked Krista.
opportunity
Yeah.
for that.
as I understand it, I think there's several grants that need to be done on the Reading side for the Gilbert and Bennett building to go ahead. There's some problems with the river being right there, and there's also problems with the soils. So they see grant after grant after grant before they can finally make a real solid decision. So this may take years before they can be in the position to make that decision. And in the meantime, they're probably looking at options of how to make it affordable.
Could they take back the sewer capacity, let's say if that project went through, and they rented it out to us, could then they take back some of that usage ability from Ridgefield? Could they rescind it?
I don't know about the situation that it would be, but I do know that the alternative to the Gilbert and Bennett is to create ball fields right there. So,
But the soil is contaminated now.
well, it's contaminated whether it's going to be multi-use housing or ball fields. So no matter what happens, they have to look at that. And then there is a problem also with the water, flooding and so forth as well.
In the pond. Thank you.
Any other questions? So other strategies and tactics. One is to promote CHFA, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, provides mortgage assistance to people who income qualify. And the mortgage, the income level and the mortgage that they would allow were so ridiculously low that nobody in Ridgefield could ever qualify for it. They've increased it so that it could be up to a house price of $600,000 and something and you could earn $135,000, which if you look at it, there is some overlap and there can be people who qualify here, so we want to promote that to people. We also want to promote ADUs. We know ADUs result in housing. And here, if you build an ADU, right, and your mother moves in, and she pays no rent, it's affordable housing if she income qualifies. which is paying no rent, but it is affordable housing, so we could count that as affordable housing if we actually took the initiative to do that. An affordable housing web page. This is something that I have to say we've been remiss on. We've been trying to get it together for a while, but Tony Phillips has been after us and the Housing Authority to get the information online, and we will be doing that when we get out of this cycle here. And the disposition of surplus municipal property. And this was interesting because this was a little bit on what the Conservation Commission was talking to you about. Wilton realized that they owned a lot of property that they didn't even really know anything about. So they put together a group to go and identify all the town properties, talk about what's being used, and then talk about what to do with the stuff that's not being used. Should it be open space? Is it suitable for development? Is it a place to put a dog park, whatever? Should it be sold off? So it seemed to us that that kind of initiative would be really useful for Ridgefield, because it would identify some parcels, especially some small parcels, that might be suitable for modest middle housing, multifamily development. So as somebody pointed out, we're not concentrating all of the affordable housing in one area of town. There's a question I saw? No? So here's what happens next. There'll be a second public information session on a date to be determined, probably on the weekend, so people who can't make it during the week can get there. We'll get P&Z feedback, we'll have Board of Selectmen feedback. There will be revision, there'll be a public hearing on May 25th. It needs to be approved by P&Z and or the Board of Selectmen, probably both, but it legally only has to be one or the other. And then it gets submitted to the state 6/1. So that's, yes?
I thought, didn't we talk about the public hearing? You said there was no public hearing? I'm
No,
confused.
there's a public hearing, there'll be a public hearing on the 25th of May.
To approve this.
Well, not to approve it, to gain official public input. It'll be a Board of Selectmen hearing.
Oh, so the public hearing is not a public hearing?
What?
No, the
No.
public hearing, you have, that's what I'm saying, so that's for us to approve it?
No. It's a public hearing, a town meeting is where you would approve something.
Oh, okay.
A public hearing is where you would ask, it's similar to this, but it's more official. This is just an informal session. But there'll be a public hearing, and then the board will have the actual vote, we hope in time to get it to the state by June 1st. Yes?
So I had mentioned, Christine Moore, Stout Ridge Road, I had mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about, is there a way to get it to a town vote? And you had said that's not up to you, that's up to the Board of Selectmen, and then, okay, so that's not on here because, so is there a way to get that, I mean, if other people feel that way, I guess we email, is that what we do?
I would, so you could certainly do that. I would confidently say there's no way, time-wise,
Okay.
to do, to have a public referendum.
I see.
We had talked about possibly doing that for the cannabis discussion, that's been pushed off.
Okay.
The decision has been made there.
Okay.
But just, given what the requirements are, there would be, at least within this time frame, there would be no way to set up a kind of a public vote.
Okay, so it would be better just to go to the public hearing, make your voice heard, and,
Yeah.
okay.
And I would just say, like, especially in public hearing, and certainly, I don't know for sure, I would assume there's ways to, outside of that, send in information or whatever, but the more specific commentary is, because people would say, oh, I don't like this, period, but you come back and say, here's something very specific, like, you talk about 125 units, I think it should be 100 units, like, that I think would be very helpful for not only this committee to hear, but the planning and zoning and board of selectmen to hear.
Okay, thank you.
Is that true, that could someone write emails to the committee and send information that way, or is it only through the public hearing?
That they can comment me?
Yeah.
Suggestions?
Yeah, they can write me.
So I think, I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but my biggest problem with the plan, not so much this one that you presented, because that, like I said, that's kind of touches a little bit on everything, but there's a lot in here about land use changes and zoning changes and infrastructure changes, and I don't really think that you touched on it as much. You kind of glossed over that.
Well, yeah, Well, I think
And I get it, I mean, it's
everybody read the
huge.
plan, so
But it's
this
a
is
really,
a chance to bring up
that to
stuff.
me reeks of desegregate Connecticut. And all these other plans and all these legislation coming down from Hartford. So this, feeds right into what they're doing.
Some of it does, yeah.
And you said earlier
Yeah,
that you were fighting that, and by doing this, we would avoid that, but you are, in effect, a proponent of some of the legislation.
We're a proponent of doing some things on our own, our way, without having the
Oh, no,
state
we
have to
can
tell
all
us.
agree on that, but that's not, it's none of this is our way. You admittedly support some of these bills.
Which bills?
Senate Bill 1024,
That was years ago, right?
no, it's coming back down now.
Which one is that?
That's the one with where you can build, we could build anything in the middle of Main Street. We can build a house, a multi-unit in the middle of a neighborhood. And you even also.
Yeah, I would not support that if we did it our way.
Well,
If we created our own version of middle housing that worked best for us.
but it's basically the same thing. I mean, now we're splitting hairs. Because
No.
you,
We support middle housing. This plan
okay,
supports middle
well,
housing.
you also emphatically support the bill. So that's what I'm saying. You support a lot of this legislation. And I just think that you should be more transparent about that. That as the Affordable Housing Chairman, you support this legislation. You support desegregate Connecticut.
Did I say that?
Yes. You know what, I'm gonna read something if you guys don't mind. Let me
Please.
give me a minute here, please. This was something from last year. Ridgefield, like most of Fairfield County's bedroom suburbs, is mostly white and affluent. Characteristics my wife and I didn't dwell on when we moved.
All right, you don't have to read the whole thing.
No, please do.
In 1991, we were drawn by the good schools, charming downtown, and a home with a stunning view. It's the kind of town you can fall in love with easily. Around that time, the Schaff versus O'Neill lawsuit was working its way through the courts. A group of Hartford area families had sued the state, alleging disproportionate educational spending that favored white communities. As I followed the story in the news, it became clear to me that Ridgefield, like its sister suburbs, was something else, segregated. In 1993, to forestall court intervention, Governor Lowell Weicker launched a statewide initiative to combat what he called the racial and economic isolation of Connecticut's school system. His plan divided the state into 11 regions, each of which was to develop its own voluntary desegregation plan. Kind of sounds like this. I signed up to serve on our regional committee. We held hearings, conducted research, and developed a plan. Unfortunately, the plan was voted down by a majority of towns in our region, and it went down in 7 of the other regions as well. That experience opened my eyes not only to Connecticut segregation, but to the pervasive resistance to addressing it. I channeled my disappointment into a commitment to affordable housing. The best way to integrate the schools, I figured, would be to integrate our communities. I've served on Ridgefield's Affordable Housing Committee since we were appointed in 1996, and I've chaired it since the turn of the century. We've worked hard for the past 25 years, and we've failed. Sure, there have been small victories, a modest development here, an expansion of accessory apartments there. But if our goal was to help Ridgefield become a more economically and racially diverse community, we've fallen short. Many people in places like Ridgefield believe that the segregation in our towns just happened, and that if we keep an open mind, it will simply unhappen. It won't. As scholars and authors have shown, as Richard Rothstein did in his widely read book, The Color of Law, segregation was designed into the suburbs through an ugly history of economic discrimination and exclusionary land use policies. And it will take equal intentionality to remedy it. The advocacy organization Desegregate Connecticut understands this, and it's why they're shrewdly focused on land use policy. Their modest proposals contained in SB 1024 would require some towns to allow certain types of multifamily housing where it currently is not allowed. Opponents of the bill wave the flag of home rule. It's a state takeover of local zoning, they cry, which will destroy the character of our towns. Underlying the current histrionics, I believe, is not racism, but an antipathy toward change. Our town is perfect, why change it? I long approached this as a communications challenge. If everyone simply understood the systemic discrimination behind our land use and housing policies, they'd become advocates for change. But I was naive. I now believe the only way communities like Ridgefield will enact the need changes is if they have to. And that's why I enthusiastically support Senate Bill 1024 and hope the provisions excluded by the committee will be reinstated. When I ask my fellow Ridgefielders to envision the perfect town, most want to see Ridgefield become an inclusive community with meaningful economic and racial diversity. Yet they fear the change required to achieve it. And so Ridgefield, like our sister towns, lacks political will. Without an impetus to change, and that's Senate Bill 1024, the status quo will endure. I love Ridgefield in almost every way. It's a great town. If we can summon the guts to address the bias in our land use policies, someday it may even be perfect. I don't think you were very forthcoming,
No.
and I don't think you were transparent.
This is
And Dave, with all due respect, I request that you step down
Exactly.
from the committee and resign.
Yeah.
I agree
And the
with
plan
that,
is
and
exactly
I wholeheartedly agree. I'm floored.
Exactly.
I'm absolutely floored. I came here for information, and the way that you presented this was, the state is making us do this, and let's take it bull by the horns, and we're in control of this. But that is your goal.
That's
And
right.
you have a personal bias about
we
this.
can't
And I
vote,
don't
so
think
it's
that
gonna
you
go
should
through.
be the chairman of this committee at all.
Well, I have my personal beliefs, if you want to call that bias. Yes, of course I have my personal
And
bias.
you've been on the committee for 20 years, and this has been your goal. I mean, why do you live here if you loathe it so?
Exactly.
Dave, your
What
bias shows up, your bias,
Excuse me? Why do I live here?
If you loathe it
You're offended?
so, is what I said.
yeah.
If you
Dave, your
loathe
bias
it,
shows when you present the plan and don't have your committee
Do
vote
you
on
have something to
it.
say?
Your bias shows when you lie to a Board of Selectmen member and say they're all on board and they're not. That's when your bias shows.
Don't buy it, friend.
It's completely false.
That's ethically challenged.
Okay.
Now, your plan, back to your plan, basically what you're telling us is the state can harm us, which they've been doing it, or we can harm ourselves.
Exactly.
That's a Hobson's choice, dude.
I think
That's not good.
The term harm, that's your,
You think that the E30G developments that have been going on in town have been good for our town?
no. I
Okay,
think
so
somebody
the
got
state is
that.
harming us with legislation.
Yes,
And we can
That
take the
is
bull by the
why-
horns and
that
harm
is why-
ourselves instead.
that is why I want to do it our way.
Good, do it our way. Take this back to your committee.
I mean, you're presenting something that's yours.
Yeah.
What about us?
No, I'm presenting the work of the Affordable Housing Committee,
And
which
everyone
was,
agreed with all of this? Everyone on that committee agreed with all of
everyone
this?
on the committee had an opportunity to
That's
say.
not how-
Have them sign off on it.
It's not the same.
Did they
All right,
agree?
I'll run
Did
it
you
the way I
vote?
run it.
Did everybody, you'll run it the way you
Wait,
run
what
it?
does that mean?
This is, are you, I mean, you're like a dictator, that's crazy.
That's not how it works.
Wow.
Yeah. Represent the whole town?
I'm floored by this. Thank you.
Yeah.
This absolutely should go to a vote. This is
It's an atrocity.
This is bad faith.
We need to slow the roll here, make a town vote.
Dave, is it true that there's absolutely no downside to delaying beyond 6/1? There's no,
This is ridiculous.
there's no
It's
penalty.
gonna come.
Are
There
we
is
losing funding?
no penalty.
There's no penalty for voting on June 1st. Good.
There's no penalty.
Yeah. So there's no deadline.
Yeah.
David,
Why do we want?
David, if I may, I believe that the legislation actually does have a provision in it that allows the first selectman to send a letter explaining why the plan wasn't approved and asking for more time to approve a plan that is acceptable. And I've already sent that to Mr. Marconi to point that out, and I hope he and the Board of Selectmen will think about, because clearly this is a hostile group.
And we need a committee that works for the towns, and the towns want. Yeah, yeah. An unbiased
agenda already.
Right.
I will repeat that this plan was put together by the Affordable Housing
Was it approved by the committee?
by the principle of unanimous consent.
Did the committee approve
It's,
this
the
by
plan
vote?
isn't done. No,
That's how
there was
committees
no
work.
vote on it. There was no vote on it.
That's how committees work. You told the Board of Selectmen they were all on board.
Yeah.
That's not
Yes,
true.
but
That's a lie.
it is not a lie.
Yes, that's the definition of a lie.
No, it is not a lie. I
Yeah,
did
was
not,
that a
I
lie?
said we did not vote on it, but everybody had the opportunity.
You said the committee was 100% on board. It's on video.
Yes,
there.
the committee was on board because
Really?
are there any objections?
Yeah.
If there are
Was the
no
committee 100%
objections,
on
if
board?
there are no objections, then that means you're on board.
That's not how a committee works, Dave. Maybe
That's
you
how
really-
the principle of unanimous consent
That's not how a
works.
committee, that's not how Robert's rules work.
The principles of
That's not
unanimous
how Robert's
consent are
rules,
in
which
Robert's
all of our
Rules of
committees in
Order.
this town
There is
work
no,
with, work.
there was no requirement that we vote on this before we take it out for the
So
test
you could have
drive.
just made this up by yourself and brought it up,
Yeah.
which you kind of
I
did.
did not. This committee worked together with our consultant to develop all the recommendations, to analyze the data. Everybody had input into every part of
So
it.
the surveys took place?
Surveys took place.
Kirk, you were interviewed?
What about interviews?
No,
I did not interview Kirk,
What?
Why?
because the interviews were done by then.
Really?
There were other things to do.
And how would
Deadlines.
the individual selected for these?
But could I address that question? I believe that in December, Mr. Brown volunteered to interview me, and he was later reassigned to himself. And I can tell you that he did not call me and interview me. And I did have quite a bit of information that I think might have been useful to the group, including information about the waiting list. But there's a lot more information that could be helpful to this group. And Mr. Goldenberg apparently did not want to access it.
That's weird.
I don't know, I came here as an informational meeting, and all the things I'm coming away with is, you talked about a huge waiting list for the housing we have now. This gentleman pointed out there's only a third of the people actually from Ridgefield on that list. You
20%.
pointed out that there's a trust fund for New Canaan and Darien. This gentleman pointed out that you were wrong. I don't know if you were stating or just flat out lying. And now we have a whole thing that's gonna affect the town that the town can't even vote on. I don't know why we have to submit it to the state at 6-1 if it's not, if it's a half-baked plan.
That's up to the Board of Selectmen.
This plan, we still have zoning issues to deal with, we have a whole bunch of issues. How can we resort to a plan that the full committee, apparently I'm just hearing now, didn't approve?
The committee did approve it, there was not a vote.
How does that work? How do you define
Hey,
that?
can I, there's other people on the committee here, I wonder if they might also comment, and we're hearing from one person?
Well, and my last comment is this.
That
My
we
last
all
comment is-
edited. We had probably weeks where we had access to this Google Doc that had basically that draft form, and we all had the opportunity to provide input. If you and I create a paper together through Google Doc, and we come and we work on it together, the assumption afterwards is, I didn't call a vote to make sure you formally say you approve it, but collaboratively, we all had access to Google Doc, which is exactly what Google Doc is designed to do.
In this town, we use
It's
Robert's
not
rules for all
rules of
committees.
Order, you're supposed to go.
Well, Robert's rule went out, and the gentleman from the committee went and attacked this poor woman who was to the left of it. And that was inappropriate.
Yes,
So you did not follow Robert's rule. And so that's went out the window. But all I'm getting away from here is that this wasn't fully approved. You flat out said misstatements to the whole group here. And there's this arbitrary deadline is 6-1 in a plan that is half-baked, and half the citizens in this town probably has no idea what's in it because we can't vote on it.
Exactly.
Well, the reason the town would not know what's in it is because they didn't come to the meeting or they didn't download it, not because they can't vote
I'm
on it.
trying to go to the meetings, but it seems like they get posted at the last minute and there's no agendas.
And the dates were wrong.
And the dates were wrong. I tried.
Say something, my name is Deborah, I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee, and I actually have some problems with the way this whole thing was handled. because I got this plan and wrote the PowerPoint that's presented to P and Z and the Board of Selectmen on April 5th. Was the day he was supposed to present to P and Z. I happened to be in Indiana that day doing colleges with my daughter, and it was kind of like, here it is, there was no discussion, there was no vote. Then I find out there's this information session happening, there was no discussion, there was no vote, no, just, it's happening. I found out of it on Facebook, saying you guys did. And I was just like, what the hell's going on? We were not informed of any information sessions, they just happened. We found out after.
Thank you.
And I'm frustrated, because I'm happy to, I want to work as a team, but I also have called out several issues. For example, this presentation tonight was not seen by us. This presentation was not shared with us. So.
How does this happen? Yeah, really, how does a committee work when you're supposed to be representing the town as committee members representing us, and then really there's one figurehead who basically manages the whole orchestration of these things? I mean,
With an agenda.
exactly, with an agenda on top of it. I love this town. I am a realtor in this town, and I have never heard of one individual being restricted from moving in this town for race, color, creed, income, whatever. They come here because they want to live in this town. And to say that we're like, we have to do this and we have to do that, so that there's all this kumbaya. There is kumbaya, because when something happens in this town, I don't care what economic level you're at, this town pulls together and they help regardless. And that is a testament of our town. That's why people move here. And to say that we have to do this because we're so bad. We're segregated. We're not affording people. Like many people here, we work goddamn hard to move to Ridgefield. And we still work hard to remain in Ridgefield. And I was told by a business owner many years ago when I owned a business in town, Ridgefield was where the people from New Canaan who can't afford to live moved to, much like Wilton. Isn't that interesting? We were the New Canaan wannabes. And when they can't afford Ridgefield, then they'll move to Brookfield. But it's an aspiration. In life, it's called aspiration. It's not a given. I taught that to my kids. You want something, you work hard and you will get it. It's not a given. Why does Mary live in the beautiful house? Because Mary worked her ass off to get into that house. And we don't, because we don't live that way. And it's not everybody has to hold hands and sing kumbaya around the fire and everybody's included. That's not the way the world works. Plain and simple.
There is undeniably a shortage of affordable housing. And it's not just in Bridgeport.
There is everywhere.
That's the US right now.
It's
And workers need
everywhere.
more housing, and you can't get people to work in jobs, but that's the
Right.
entire
But you need to change the
US.
characteristics for the town in order to retrofit it, to make it be what everybody wants it to be.
The
That's
population
not
of
the way it
Ridgefield has been
works.
flat for a decade,
10
the
years.
population of Connecticut has been flat for 2 decades. It's really arrogant to believe that a lot of people want to move to the highest tax state in the country.
Exactly.
And we're gonna make that affordable somehow, on the backs of everybody
And on
else.
top of it, you want to build in the highest price area,
Right.
within a quarter mile of the most
Exactly.
expensive area, like
And,
Park
yeah,
Avenue.
it's
Go
insane.
build affordable housing. I don't see affordable housing on Park Avenue. Why don't you go build a sewer out to Ridgebury and build all your buildings there, over by Rivington? There's plenty of land.
Yeah, exactly.
Done. That's all you have to do, build a sewer.
There is a shortage of affordable housing
What's still on top of it?
everywhere
Right.
in the state. And every town, I believe, our committee believes, the Board of Selectmen believes, because they appointed our committee, to look for ways to increase affordable housing in Ridgefield.
Well, we can do that. with-
This is our plan for doing it. The town has not been doing it otherwise, yes.
But the issue is that we only have town water and town sewer in the center of town, and so everything is getting concentrated downtown. And it seems like you haven't really looked at any other areas except downtown, and
And
that's what
Branchville?
people are. What?
And Branchville.
Yeah,
But that's tying into Reading.
Why,
but there's
making housing
nothing down
affordable
here.
is
So
one
why
thing.
aren't we looking in other, it doesn't seem like in other towns like in Westport, they looked at all the pieces of property they own and what the state owned and tried to figure out where they could build things, as opposed to taking the one piece of open land in the middle of town and saying that's where the development has to go. I think that's why people are pissed.
How are
And
you
the
gonna
other
make
thing
the
that
rest of
everybody
town
has to
affordable,
understand
though?
too is the state is pushing this desegregate Connecticut, which is funded by real estate groups from New York, is pushing to put a lot of buildings in every single town. And what they're trying to do here is be proactive, because whether we like it or not, it's coming. Unless you write your representatives and tell them you don't want this legislation.
They don't care.
They don't care. They don't care.
But I think the Affordable Housing Committee, I think, you have a hard job. Sorry. But I think you have to get more creative and think more of reuse of older buildings, but not building, new buildings in the middle of our parks and rec. You just think of maybe doing a recount, like you said, of the, of places that probably are not counted. We need really good people to go in and do a good count. I know that there's places for rent for $18.50, but I know you can't do that. If we did a count of it.
Where?
Well, do you remember your consultant? We asked your consultant at the November meeting, and I remember specifically asking this question about our housing supply and how much of our housing supply right now would meet the affordability threshold. Not the deed restriction, put that aside, but just the price of
Right,
it.
a lot of
And he said well over the 10% threshold. If we could count it, so basically it's here. And we need to go after the state, and we need to push this. We need to fight to amend 830G, take out the deed restriction.
Yeah, but we have an affordable housing committee that doesn't want that. They want 1024.
1024 is not up this year. 1024 was last year.
They're coming down through, right now, they're on the floor.
1024,
1024, there's 3 of them. And right now, they're getting voted on.
but not 1024.
Yes, it's back. And I think
It
it has
made it out of
favorable
the committee?
I think it's in committee.
Not that I know.
Well,
But okay.
I went to a meeting of advocates from Westport, from Greenwich, from Fairfield, where Democrats and Republicans work together to protect their town. And they all said the same thing, and they're fighting, and they're trying to fight the legislation, and they're saying, don't destroy our towns. We like this little bridge. We know it's not effective, but this little bridge is part of our character, that little bridge in Westport. So they're all fighting together and that's what we need. We need to band together with these towns.
Yeah.
And we need Rudy to get in there and say, we're not destroying our town. We'll do what we can, but we need to keep this town the way it is. No, we don't.
Right.
We can fight at P&Z. We have a new P&Z board now. We can fight 830J. When they come here, I mean, yeah, you may get sued. We may have to suck it up a little bit sometimes. But there's been successful fights before in different towns. We don't just have to roll over and take it.
Religious fighting.
But 8-30G remains in place, with other bills possibly coming
Right,
down the
that's-
pipe. So again, the question is, do we want to pursue it our way? Or do we want the state to tell us what to do? The answer to say, no, nothing at all, that's not a
Well, I
possibility.
understand that. I'm not suggesting that because I know we do have a need for some affordable housing. And I think everybody here recognizes that need. It's just we don't have to destroy our town in doing it. We don't need to, all this land use changes, all this
Right,
infrastructure changes. We can't just change the infrastructure of our town. This is who we are.
Ridgefield has always been changing, the infrastructure is always changing. In fact, the infrastructure on Main Street is changing
Well,
right
because
now.
it's a state road and the state is doing that.
So, about the number of affordable units, I know there had been some discussion, was it last year, or Rudy, I think Rudy talked about it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Why can't we consider Casagmo and Fox Hill as affordable units within our counting as far as meeting the 10% threshold? Because,
They were too old. They have to be built after 1985 as well.
And they're also not restricted.
They just have to be either deed restricted or government assisted.
so
And
why,
built after
why
1985.
why can't we pursue that? I mean, we have.
Well, it was mentioned, and you know what happened at Casagmo? They passed a regulation that nobody could put a deed restriction on their own unit.
hurts the value of the unit, ultimately.
Please
Yes, sir.
put in this report that the status of the town is X% would qualify as affordable under different rules. So that they know that people who live in Casagamo are really underneath the average cost of a home in Ridgefield.
But
And it's more affordable for someone to live there in
Yes.
Foxville.
absolutely more affordable.
And that information is in your report, so they can mull over the fact that, well, okay, Ridgefield has
Sure.
the right setup for
Well-
affordable housing.
We'll put that in, that's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
However, please keep in mind that it's not considered an affordable unit unless somebody lives in there who income qualifies.
And
But maybe a big percentage.
if someone can afford to own those, and they're under the average median cost of a home in Ridgefield, substantially below, that's a fact. What the regulations say and what they want to define it, okay, that's the state. But you can have some data in there that we have a lot of people here who live there and they could qualify for, under a different definition, affordable housing.
Or maybe even under the current definition. Yeah?
Yep.
We'd like to see that, absolutely.
So Dave, one more question.
Yes.
And then I'll shut up. You're saying we're looking at existing buildings, we're looking at existing properties. You know, we have the downtown committee, we have the POCD, there was some talk of doing overlays, all of that stuff. The subcommittee got voted illegal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't understand, I walk on Main Street every day, and there are a lot of Main Street stores with empty businesses above that once, according to Rudy, because I talked to Rudy about this, were once apartments. Why can't they be retrofitted as apartments and have those become either deed restricted or affordable or whatever and be counted in the numbers? Next to me, I live at 378 Main Street, which is an apartment building, which I downsized to from my house because my husband and I chose to stay in place. We were going to move, but we chose to stay in place. And next door, where the Rodier Flowers is, upstairs is all empty now. It's been for rent for months, for the last year, when Jeffrey Morris moved his business out of there. Those used to be apartments. Why aren't we pursuing that with the landlords of these buildings, or the owners of these buildings? Because those would provide a lot of downtown apartments, if that's what the idea is to bring people into the town, and people that work in town, affordable living. Why not pursue that? And I didn't see any of that in your report.
I can't remember if we mentioned it. We talked about,
Adaptive reuse.
no, but I think I don't know, it's 48 pages, I don't remember if we mentioned, but certainly it's something we've talked about. And there is actually nothing, so far as I know, that stops a landlord from doing
But
that.
what I'm saying is, why isn't P&Z or the Board of Selectmen or you approaching the owners of these buildings, Biddle and the rest of them, and saying, will you work with the town? You have, you know, they write it off as a loss, so it's nothing to them. But if they could put people in those buildings on the second and third floors,
Right.
you would have a much more vibrant downtown. You would have stores that would want to stay. You would have stores that would want to open up. And I think the Bailey Avenue travesty down at the bottom of the road, with Patrick wanting to put in first floor apartments, stinks. And to me, if P&Z allows that to happen, then the rest of Main Street could turn into first floor apartments. So why not take advantage of the open space up above all of these
But
stores?
then Andrew, remember what they're trying to bring in is literally Section 8 government subsidies.
I know that.
Wait, what?
They're not
Affordable
shopping.
living is
They're
more
not
than
gonna
just the
be-
rent price. We've got the second most expensive Stop and Shop in the entire franchise. Only Nantucket that bolts things in is more expensive than ours. So, where do these people go? How do they shop? How do they get to the store and back? All of this
So,
stuff is.
to
What I'm saying-
answer
what
your
I'm saying,
question,
Dave.
we have approached landlords with it over the years, in the general conversation and the respect, because not only everything you've suggested, but people who live there go to work in the day and they leave, so their parking spaces are empty. So there's other benefits to that too. The answer we heard was that it's very expensive to convert and that it's a headache because you're dealing with
So why
residential
not give them a
tenants.
tax incentive to convert for X amount of years, if they will convert these empty spaces into usable spaces.
That's something that
I
a
mean,
housing
but
trust
that
fund
might-
could be helpful with.
I think that's something that affordable housing or planning and zoning could look at and put it on the table for discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm Krista, I'm an architect, and my firm is doing that in New Canaan, looking at the upper levels of some of the buildings in New Canaan to do that.
Yeah, I know they, I just think it's a great idea. I just think we're missing out on a wonderful opportunity. It might only provide 25 to 40 apartments.
That's a lot.
But that's 25 to 40 affordable apartments.
Yeah, right.
But it happens very slowly, you know, it's not something that happens quickly, it's sort of like
You
more
know,
like.
but we should have been looking at this a while ago.
And what's nice about that is it's not adding to our supply.
Right.
Non-affordable units. Every time we build these buildings with 40 or 30 units, we're getting 9 affordable and another 20 non-affordable. So this is just strictly straight up affordable.
I mean, it's just an idea.
Good idea. Any other thoughts before I set you free?
I just have a quick point.
Another call to resign?
Today,
Second.
today, the West Cog group actually is posted a draft of a payment suggestion, so that if you haven't reached your house, your 1030G goal, you have the ability to buy points from other towns to count to your housing stock. So for example, places like who reach their goal rate, their housing goal, reach their 30G goal, such as Stanford, they're where you are, you can buy points from them and have them count towards your 30G goal. So that was another way that could possibly happen. And this is fairly new, this announcement just came out today. But basically what it does is it talks about how that doesn't matter, if you try to put housing everywhere, it doesn't work because not the housing in every town can support jobs, can't support transportation needed, and this infrastructure. So what Westcog is thinking of doing is putting together this plan that allows towns to pay a fee and count housing into the neighborhoods toward their affordable housing goal. And that's something that we should hopefully look at, and hopefully that Westcog would
But wait a minute, the town sends $130 million to Hartford as it is in income taxes alone. We get back 1.5 million, right, Kurt? So we're talking about sending more to Hartford to redistribute to the same cities that are getting 80 to 90% of their school budget paid for by the state. That's literally insane.
All right, are there any other comments about affordable housing before we wrap the meeting? Because we're 15 minutes over.
I just have one final thing. Regarding interviews, there's another committee member who's not here today who was tasked with doing interviews with David. And I let David know as soon as we talked about those interviews that Mr. Cart had reached out to me personally to ask to be interviewed. So he knew it from the beginning that he wanted to be interviewed, and he chose not to interview for whatever reason. So I just want to make that record, because I did share his email, because you sent me an email, Kurt, and I sent it to him as an FYI. Actually, I made a note of it, public record on our meeting.
It's in the minutes. It's in the December 13 minutes.
So the fact is that you were like asking for an interview before you even started the process.
Right.
So if it wasn't, and I thought that it was done so by that group of people that were doing that.
Any other comments or questions? Krista?
I just want to say also, it's been challenging with us having meetings this year because everything's been on Zoom. And it's so much, it would be so much better if it had not been this time of year where we had a pandemic and we could all meet in a room. So it's just made it a little more difficult and a little more challenging for our committee to, come together. And the scheduling of meetings has been challenging as well, with all the rules of reserving a time and putting out the public notice.
But it does not prevent you all from voting as a committee.
Exactly.
It's not a dictatorship, it is a committee, and a committee that is chaired and people vote. I've sat on multiple Zoom calls, it is inconvenient as all hell.
No, I'm
but-
saying that this is, there's a lot of issues that are being
There's
discussed
dozens
here.
of committees and
they've been
boards in
discussed
town
at
that all
length.
meet.
And there's a time frame, and the
And
time
there
is
is.
up, and it's just very hard to get into depth.
All of the
But
other
at the
committees
end of
do
the
it.
day, as
But it might
members
be a
of
reason that we
committees,
could extend our
as members of
deadline.
committees, you're taking on a responsibility in good times and in bad.
And that's part of the transparency, is the
Exactly.
messaging,
I
the
sit on
notification.
many
It would be a
committees.
Every
good
board
reason-
committee does it.
It'd be a good reason for us to extend the deadline because of this challenge.
I think you should do that anyway.
You should do it anyways,
Yeah.
regardless of everybody's
Exactly.
measurement. This was not held properly.
Yeah, and that'll be
At
more
all.
professional.
A lot of people feel, and I'm gonna speak for people that I've spoken to, and I'm, feel that a lot of this work has been done in the dark. I have tried to follow online. I have read the plans as much as I can, but without, and I know I've said this in meetings before, Kirk has me on camera, without a valid, vibrant newspaper in this town that can record and report what goes on, too much is hidden from the public.
Exactly.
And that's why people are getting angry. And the editor of the newspaper just resigned. She moved on to a new position with the company. So where's the public getting its news? We don't have a newspaper. Richfield Press used to be the go-to every Thursday, that you couldn't wait to get home and find out what the town issues were.
You get it
You
from
couldn't
Facebook.
wait to find out what the letters to the editors said. You might not always agree with them, but everybody had a voice. And I feel in this whole process, there's not been a lot of voices.
Well, I want to just push back on that a little because nothing has been done in secret. Every meeting has been
I'm not saying
public.
it's secret,
Every
Dave.
meeting has been noticed. We have assiduously followed the open meetings law and the Freedom of
But it's
Information
not
Act.
reported publicly in the paper, which is what I'm saying. So a lot of people have no idea that this is even going on tonight. Not everybody's on Facebook. Not everybody goes on the town website. I happen to because I care. I show up. I don't always agree with you. I let you know when I do. But I just think that people are coming out of this COVID haze and now are waking up and going, what is happening to our town? And you know what? This is 3 times the people that were here at the last meeting. This is going to continue to grow. It's going to get around town. So I think the public information that is being given to the town, disseminated to the residents, has not been good. And I think we could do a better job. I don't know if it means you do a public mailing. I don't know how you can do it. I don't know if you do a phone call, please come out to the info session. Because the way I found out about this was because you posted it on Facebook. Because I care, I keep coming to these meetings, I keep listening. And I know I'm not the only one. But there are people here who can't come out during the week. They have children. Or they get, or they're working.
There's
Even with
conflicting meetings every time.
it's just tough. And I think what you guys are trying to do is a worthy cause, I really do. But I think the messaging has sucked. And I think that too many people in this town have no idea what's happening. And then it's gonna happen, and then they're gonna go, how did it happen? Why didn't I know about it? And that's where you're gonna start seeing a big exodus out of this town. I really do, I fear for that. I really do fear for that, because at some point, the housing prices aren't gonna stay up anymore. They're gonna start to go down. And
That'll solve his
the
problem.
median income is the median income is gonna change. So then are more people gonna be available to have affordable housing according to this new metric? I mean, I don't know, I
I
just
think the main points
people
of the plan should be posted in the paper, so people can read it.
I received a call today from somebody who's taking over temporarily. She's going to receive a copy of the video of this meeting. I hope she enjoys it as much as I did. I've been sending her documents. I did send the paper all the publicity for this meeting. They did not publish it even after I followed up with them several times.
Well, that's the
I
problem.
posted it online, I reached out to groups in town.
How do we get a newspaper to care?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, hers is,
Hers is awful.
they're awful.
Yeah.
I canceled my subscription, I'm
Yeah,
working.
they're awful.
Based on the pandemic, they say the people that can't really afford, based on your numbers, are the ones that are affected from the pandemic. So they're gonna be hit even harder. How are they gonna afford, if we gave them all the housing, how are they gonna afford it? They may not even have a job by the time you're
Right.
ready to move in.
But I will ask, there's been a lot of misinformation posted online. Somebody posted that we're recommending 1,241 new units. That's not the case. Lots of
That
other,
was in your plan
It
based
wasn't a
on
plan.
your organizations that you were relying on for your information.
Our fair
Right, but
share
anybody
according to
who-
the
That's our fair
legislation.
share.
yes, but anybody who actually read the plan would see that that's not what we
Well, it was in the
recommended.
plan.
No,
That's
your,
background data.
Dave, your plan is only to get us to the next stop moratorium. It doesn't go to, that 125 to get us to the next moratorium, neat. What happens after that? We have to go do it again. It's a treadmill and
It's
we'll
a
never ever get there.
10-year,
We'll never get there in 10
it's a
years.
5-year plan. We'll never
The
get,
legislation being jammed down is 1,200 plus.
I don't know what's gonna happen with the fair share thing. I don't support that. I think we should be allowed to do it on our own, but I think we should actually do it. Because if we're just gonna pay it lip service, then we're
But
just
don't
wasting
do
our
it in the
time.
middle of town, you know, you care about, you must
Well,
care about.
let me tell you something. When you put a lot of housing on the outskirts of town, where do people go? They go to downtown, that puts more traffic on the roads. Smart building principles say density, the highest density goes downtown.
You'll
But
let
have you been on Main
people-
Street at rush hour?
Oh my
I'm
gosh,
here
yes.
every single day.
Yes.
Every single day. I live right on Main
Yes.
Street. I don't go out between the hours of 4 and
Yes.
7
And you know that
because of the traffic on Main Street.
a share of that is coming from people during rush hour who are avoiding 84 and 684. But yeah, so that's infrastructure stuff, and we have to work on that. So my final point is, Ridgefield's always changing. Who's gonna decide how it changes?
Open land, you'll never get back.
Right.
Right,
Open land is
right.
the thing.
Never get it
We
back.
need to push the date back from June 3rd. We're not ready to, we're not there, we're not ready. I think there are a lot of questions have been brought up tonight, there are a lot of points that need to be looked at. And I, for one, am asking the Affordable Housing Committee to postpone sending it to the state on June 1st. Because I think you'll be sending, unfortunately, a half-assed plan.
Yeah.
I concur.
You need to get
We
this.
will only send a whole ass plan. I think we need to talk to the Board of Selectmen because it's their job to approve it and decide when it goes. We were instructed to have this plan at the state on June 1st.
Okay, so the next Board of Selectmen meeting, Sean has been sitting here all night, listening. I'm sure he'll share with the Board of Selectmen what was shared here tonight, and I think all of us need to show up at the next Board of Selectmen meeting.
I think you need to get your ethics right on this committee. You got a problem. You lied to a selectman during the last meeting.
I did not lie to a selectman.
You lied to a selectman during the last meeting. It was on video, Dave.
Yes.
We were there.
No, Sean, it's not
You
true. You
said
can play
your
this
committee was
ridiculous
all
game,
on
you can
board.
try this character assault. It's
You
not
said
gonna
your
work.
committee was all on board
Yes.
with this plan.
Yes.
That is
they were.
factually incorrect.
Well, okay, so
I know of at least two that were not.
they
and
said
weren't
they
even
were on
informed.
board, but they didn't say it publicly then.
Dave,
Didn't let.
you need to vote on this. That's what committees work.
Take a vote.
Take votes.
Take it up.
Record
Like all
votes.
Thank you for the advice. If there's nothing else, let's adjourn.
Step down.
Please.